Okay, recording. Great. As chairman of the House Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee, I find the due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12 and pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a public hearing on bills referred to the committee and scheduled in the House calendar for today. An executive session may be held on any bills referred to the committee. Please note that there is no physical location for the members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously in this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all the members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in the meeting by Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar of the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access this meeting, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each states their presence, please also state whether there is anybody in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under right to know law. All right, Keith, you're on.
All right, Representative Hunt.
I am here and I am all alone.
Representative Petusik.
It's unusual. Okay.
He's not on mute. Representative Osborne. Representative Ammon, present and alone. Representative Abramson. Representative Ham.
Here alone.
Representative DePalma.
Here and alone.
Representative Greason.
Present and alone.
Representative Johnson.
Here in the LOB with Max.
Is Max there?
Yeah, he just walked in.
Just
Okay.
came in.
Representative Terry.
I am here and I'm alone in this room.
Representative Bartlett.
I'm here and alone in this room.
Representative Abel. Representative Abel. Representative Herbert.
I'm here alone in this room. Somebody else is working in another office.
Representative Van Houten.
Present, alone.
Representative Fargo.
I'm here and I'm alone.
Representative Weston.
Here and alone.
Representative Bellew.
Here, home alone.
Representative Burrows.
I'm here alone in this room.
Representative McAleer.
Here, currently alone in this room.
All right, that is, let's see, 16 present, Mr. Chair.
Good. All right, so we will open up the public hearing on Senate Bill 36 and hear from the prime sponsor, Senator French. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Chairman Hunt. How are you today?
I am just dandy.
Hey, good morning to the entire Commerce Committee. For the record, my name is Harold French, Senator District 7, and I'm here to present to you today Senate Bill 36 for your consideration. A very good bill at that. This is a recommendation from the Insurance Department, and this bill would remove the requirement that applicants applying for automobile coverage do not have to sign the statement of residency. It's an outdated requirement that they're looking to get rid of.
That's it?
There's not much to it. As you know, most times when I apply for or get new coverage for my automobile, I do it over the phone. I never even go into the insurance office. And it's a requirement that really doesn't need to be on our books anymore.
Well, I guess this again shows how old I am, because I remember when this law was created, and it was created because the problem of people in out of state coming up and trying to get auto insurance in New Hampshire. So I assume that the bookkeeping or regulating, enforcing this was more problems than it's worth, and that's the reason why you want to.
I would assume you're correct, Representative, and obviously, you have a long background and knowledge on the institution, and will see fit to guide this through your committee.
Right. Well,
remembering that all that you sent over to us will be coming before me.
Yes, that's for sure. Representative Van Houten has a question.
Good morning. Question to you, Mr. Chair. Will the insurance company be testifying? Because despite the clarity of what the senator has just presented, I find the wording to maybe be a little bit difficult to showcase that clarity.
Let's see, do I have?
I believe they will be testifying today.
Yes, I have James Fox. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Senator French? Yes,
yes.
Representative McClear.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Senator French, does this still mean that somebody out of state cannot come into New Hampshire or on the phone purchase auto insurance? They still must be a New Hampshire resident,
yes.
I presume?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Chris Herbert, nothing from you?
No, we try to keep this question to a minimum.
It's just another brilliant piece of legislative work by the senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. I knew you would think so. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator. Are you guys meeting today?
No, actually, Judiciary at 1. We need your bills. Send them over, will you?
Yes, we will send. I think, well, we're done with our bills. So.
Oh, good.
But, okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you. It's good seeing you, Harold. I'm sorry. Do we have another hand? Max, did you, Representative Abramson, did you have a question for Senator French?
Yeah, is it, not sure this is correct or not, is it a problem with somebody who, maybe not somebody who's out of state, but somebody who lives here but hasn't been able to establish residency here yet? I mean, when I first moved here, there were a lot of different steps you had to take in a particular order. It's bad if somebody who's moving here buys auto insurance before they get to New Hampshire.
This requires that your vehicle is garaged here in New Hampshire, exclusively garaged. So I guess when you get here, you can get it.
So,
all right. But when I moved, or I should say follow up.
Further question, may inquire.
When I moved here, I had just bought a car, and because it was a brand new car, I moved here, I actually drove here almost 20 years ago. And I didn't have insurance, and I didn't have really anything on the car other than the bill of sale. I wonder if it just makes more sense in general just to say, you know, if you're moving here, if your intent is to move here, that you're eventually going to have the car garaged here, that you have the right to buy insurance.
If you see fit, make some changes.
We have a good long discussion on that.
All set? Okay. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Chair will call on Mr. Fox from the Department of Insurance.
Good afternoon, or good morning. My name is James Fox, and I'm the Property and Casualty Director for the New Hampshire Insurance Department. As Chairman Hunt and Senator French said, that this is, in essence, really how the department sees it, a modernization bill. This form has been in place for a while. It was originally in place due to concern over rate invasion, as it's called. People come to New Hampshire, from New Hampshire to buy insurance. I've been at the department now for 9 years. And we don't have any issues on this. So the thought process is we've had more problems with the form because this is the only state that requires this is the state of New Hampshire. And we have, the form is pretty specific. So some people can't meet the requirements of the form who have an intent to stay here, which is really should be the standard, as Representative Abramson brought up, which is the only really standard when you first come to New Hampshire. You come here and you have an intent to stay here. So the thought process from the department's point of view is that it would just be easier to have the basic standards, which is you're either a resident, which in the rule we view as you're in New Hampshire and you have an intent to stay in New Hampshire, or you have your vehicle. So if you're from a different state and you leave your vehicle here to have a vehicle in New Hampshire, that's also permissible. In that sense, it really goes back to basic property insurance that applies to all types of insurance, that the location of the risk is where the insurance should be purchased. Going back to the New Hampshire only issue, the problem from the carrier's perspective is because it's only a New Hampshire issue, so they sometimes have a hard time either like in certain instances recognizing the form, so then they don't recognize the form, and then because of the rule they send out cancellation notices that shouldn't be sent out. So we have seen quite a bit of that. So in essence, we have New Hampshire residents who have to go through the hassle of having their insurance canceled or threatened to be canceled if they don't work with the insurance company on a kind of a prolonged basis. And again, we haven't seen any rate invasion since I've been here. And from a regulatory perspective, to the extent that the insurance companies, which we think they are able to, aren't recognizing that certain people aren't from New Hampshire and shouldn't be getting New Hampshire insurance, we can look at that from a market conduct perspective and require corrective actions on the back end to make sure that insurance companies are catching people who might be trying to get New Hampshire insurance. Although again, we haven't really seen that, but that's how we would generally handle it. And that's how we handle things pretty much in all areas of regulation. So in essence, we're only getting rid of the form. We're keeping all the same standards. The standards aren't changing. And there should be a benefit to consumers who maybe were getting canceled, and to the industry for not having to comply with a rule that doesn't really provide much consumer protection. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, Representative Van Houten has a question for you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Fox. Thank you for testifying. Am I going to get feedback? Should I try?
Having trouble hearing you and understanding.
No. Am I okay now?
Yeah. How many microphones do you have got? I think, Connie, unfortunately, you have to log back at.
Am I okay now?
Oh, there you go.
Now, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I understand the concept of modernization and simplification that is intended here. That's absolutely fine. I don't understand the wording. The amendment, the actual wording in the RSA itself has always baffled me. But now I look at the change. I don't mean the amendment. I look at the change that is requested, and the words "at that time." The last three words "at that time" are confusing to me. Could you explain what "at that time" means and if that's appropriate?
Yeah, if you just give a second to read and find the "at that time" phrase.
It's at the...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm wonky here.
Is she still there?
I am. Is my microphone okay now?
Yes.
Okay. The last three words inserted in Roman 4 are "at that time." and there's no
Oh,
designation
I'm sorry,
of what that.
I'm sorry, I was in the first section. Okay.
And I apologize for the microphone issue. I've totally confused things, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, well, at that time just refers back to, because that's the part about the exclusive garaging. So the first part is named insured was not a resident of the state of New Hampshire at the time the policy was issued or renewed. And then, so that's the general standard. And then the exception is unless the insured vehicle at issue was exclusively garaged in New Hampshire at that time when they filled out the, really the application for the either the initial policy or the renewal. So it's basically what we're saying is, you're supposed to be a resident, obviously, when you do that. But the exception for that is if you're, somebody from Rhode Island who's got a house in Lake Centipede and they leave a car there, maybe it's a 4-wheel drive, they don't need to be a resident. If that car stays in Centipede and every time it's, the policy's issued and renewed, basically it's there. That's the intent of that.
Okay.
Follow up, please.
Oh, follow up. I didn't hear that. Okay, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a puppy in the background that's just had surgery. The word "that" is confusing to me because at that time seems to refer to the time at which the policy is purchased, that it has to be garaged here at the time the policy is purchased. I may be just quibbling about words here, but it's a reference that is bothersome to me.
Well, I mean, the idea is that it says in the beginning, at the time the policy was issued or renewed. So that goes back to at the time the policy is issued or renewed. So we would want the property to be in New Hampshire at that time. And not be like, well, I have some intent to do it in the future, so I'd like to get an insurance policy for that. It's like the idea is like at that point in time, your vehicle is exclusively garaged here. And now the way we usually do this under the rule is, which if there's some, the other piece we can do, if the statute is slightly off, we can always, we're going to have to do the rule next, so we can clean up any of that in the rule, which is more detailed. But the idea is, so if you, at the time the policy is issued to you, you have your car in New Hampshire, and then later, 2 months later, you decide, I'm not going to, you had the intent to have it only exclusively garage for the policy period, but then you decide to take it back to Rhode Island, then we would let you go, which is how it always works, to the end of that policy period, and then we would expect you to shift to a Rhode Island policy. So I think that's kind of why we were saying at that time, because we need to have a period of time, and it seems as though the correct period of time is the intent when the policy was issued or when the policy renewed, because that's how the rule also operates.
Thank you.
I mean, I always find when I write a sentence, it's awkward. I just shuffle it. So you could say that the policy was issued or renewed. The vehicle should exclusively garaged in New Hampshire. So it can be added, at that time, the vehicle is exclusively garaged in New Hampshire. In other words, move at that time to the beginning of the phrase rather than at the end of the phrase. Maybe that makes you feel better. But
I think we can definitely just repeat it. The other way to do it is just to be redundant. We could just, instead of taking at the time, to say it again.
Same time. Okay. Representative Fargo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for taking the question. Could you speak to line 20 where it says RSA 412.18 relative to the exclusion of certain claims in the calculation of premium rates?
Right. Yeah. So that just is to remove that rating issue, because that law says claims paid. So the current version is claims paid by an insurer under a policy automobile insurance as defined in RSA 417 issued to an individual determined by the insurer falsely attested in the statement of residency required by 47A3B shall not be included in the calculation of premium rates filed with the commissioner if such claims may lawfully be feasibly be assigned to another state. And that is not untrue, but we don't need basically a law on that, since we don't have the residency form. So that's basically the old law was saying if you falsely attest to a residency form and you're from another state, then that we shouldn't use that to determine our rate calculations for the insurance company, like loss experience. But again, this has been a law that, although well-intended at the time, has not really been used. That I would say I can take a 412.18 on assigning rates to another state. That is, I would say, never been used. So it's more of an issue as we don't need it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Abramson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I guess similar to the question I asked the sponsor, if you have, a lot of times people buy a car or a truck in order to make the move. My preference would be that they already have insurance, at the time that they land here. It was a fun time coming to New Hampshire. They did a road trip here. Is there a way to, I guess, kind of clean this up so that if somebody's buying a car or truck and then they move to New Hampshire, that they could have that vehicle insured before it gets here? I mean,
well, if you're in New Hampshire, you can get a policy. Usually what most people do is they have their policy from a different state, and then they work with the insurance company, who can be multiple states, and then the policy is switched to a New Hampshire policy either when they arrive or at renewal. So that's the standard, and that's the rule, is that when you're in New Hampshire, you're entitled to a New Hampshire policy.
Yeah, the way I look at that is, maybe, and help me out if this is the way, is that if you know the day you're going to move to New Hampshire, you can set up ahead of time that insurance policy and say that normally we always say, well, we want the policy to be active today. But you wouldn't say it is, you say, I want it to be active, and you pick the day that you're going to move. And so therefore the insurance, you don't have any lapses between your two different insurance policies, that you've got to make sure that the other policy expires on, you can then call them and say, I want my old state policy to expire on the same day, and I want my new policy to take effect on that day. So yes, you could actually get the policy, get it set up, but that you can, when you get a policy, you can set when the effective date begins.
Well,
would you agree, Mr. Fox?
Yeah, there's two ways people handle it. They either they're the people who like to just let it roll out to renewal, and they say, oh, by the way, I'm in New Hampshire. Then it gets switched that time, or people who are more proactive and they let their insurance company know that they'll be moving to New Hampshire on this date, and they'd like to switch to a New Hampshire policy on that date, and then the insurance company will do that for you.
Is that you all set, Representative Abramson?
Follow up.
Further question you may inquire.
As long as that's not your first car. My other question is in proposed Part 4, Section 2, Part 4 of the bill, where it says unless the vehicle at issue was exclusively garaged in New Hampshire at that time. I live on the border, and we have quite a few people who their car is garaged either most of the time or a lot of the time at a place in Seabrook or Hampton, but they do have the car overnight in North Shore, Mass, or even in Maine. Shouldn't this be a majority of the time, or enough of the time that it kind of justifies keeping the New Hampshire insurance policy? Some cars are garaged in two different states over the course of a year.
Well, yeah, the intent of this is for non-residents to be able to purchase insurance in New Hampshire. So that's the part of the exclusive. If you're a New Hampshire resident and you have multiple residences, you could still get a policy even if you're in two different states. But the intent of the exclusive, the garaging in New Hampshire is that does go back to the rate invasion, because we wouldn't want people who are, again, it's easy for Rhode Island, for example, who come up a lot. And then, so then they say, oh, well, I come here a lot. And then we have to start doing like counting. If either, so the purpose of the non-residence is either you have a car that's here or you don't.
And I assume the word garage in the definition means not necessarily in a garage, but that it's parked in a driveway.
Follow up?
Further, you disappeared on me. Oh, there you're way down there. Okay, yeah, further question you may inquire. You took your hand down.
Okay. What about all the people who are parked at the Seabrook Walmart and they're here right now, but that doesn't mean, you know, they just got here, they're going to come up here, they expect to spend most of their time in New Hampshire. Wouldn't it be better if those people want to buy insurance, wouldn't it be better just to open it up and say they intend to spend much of the year here? Shouldn't they be covered? Shouldn't they be able to buy auto insurance coverage for New Hampshire? Why does it have to be exclusively if they're going to be driving around a bit?
People who are parked at the parking lot at the Walmart right now, who are in New Hampshire a lot, generally insurance and for property insurance in particular in all areas, not just auto insurance, is location rated. And so that there would be a concern if you were really from an area, say in Massachusetts, that has a high incidence of accidents, and you had your vehicle there, 50% of the time, and then you were trying to get it insured in New Hampshire. The insurer rating system is based on New Hampshire risks, not on Massachusetts risks. So that would, in essence, change to a certain extent, fundamentally change insurance, at least as New Hampshire has always viewed it. From a rating perspective, in essence, how much they would charge.
Right. The assumption is, Representative, that New Hampshire has insurance rates that are cheaper than Rhode Island or Massachusetts or Connecticut. And I can't necessarily say for Maine, but so we don't. If those people are coming up here, we just assume they stick with the policy they have from where their residency is. Not that they say, well, I spent enough time in New Hampshire, I deserve, and I have a summer home here, I should deserve to have, register my car here and get the lower rates, even though I spend the winter and the fall and spring in my home in Rhode Island.
I guess this is carryover from a previous bill. We have a lot of people who kind of move around New England, and we want to get as many of those people who are on our roads with some kind of insurance rather than no insurance at all.
Want them to have their insurance in those states. Everybody else's states requires them to have insurance. So yes, we agree with them. We want them to have insurance, but we just don't want them, if they really live in Rhode Island or they live in, in a Lawrence, Mass, where there seems to be high claims history down there, we certainly don't want them to have a New Hampshire insured car down there.
I mean, a lot of them live in an RV, go from parking lot to parking lot. So.
That is an interesting question. I do know that there's the movie right now out, right? The Nomad movie. So, okay, Representative Abel.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question of Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox, I understand why this issue would be a concern of an insurance company to make sure that they're getting the proper payment, but I'm not sure why this is of concern to the state of New Hampshire or to the insurance department. And I wonder, from your perspective, if you could explain again why this, what the problem is from the state's perspective that we're trying to solve here. Thank you.
Well, I guess it depends which way you're coming at this. The department's position, or the reason we're here, is that the form's unnecessary. So to have it is, unneeded. So that there's no reason to keep it. So it kind of lowers that requirement. And then from the consumer's point of view, particularly, you'll have some direct writers. And so there's no agent you can go into their office and sign a form. So then they either try to do it online or they mail it out to you and ask you to mail it back. So you'll have certain people who don't mail it back, and then they'll get a cancellation notice. Certain people who do mail it back, and then the insurance company doesn't recognize it. It goes into the wrong box, and then they get a cancellation notice. So from the department's perspective, I think we've determined over the years that this has caused more difficulties and has solved no problems. So it is an unnecessary rule to keep, and we'll be able to monitor it. We do market conduct examinations and claim examinations on auto insurers quite often. So, we look through all the files and samples. And if we saw this was all of a sudden a problem that many people from other states were trying to get into New Hampshire for insurance rate reasons, which was the reason for the form originally, then we would maybe take a different position. But we have, the 9 years I've been here, we've examined the auto insurance companies many times and looked at many claim files, and we have not seen any pattern or even really instances of people trying to get into New Hampshire to save what would be an extremely modest amount on their insurance premiums.
May I ask a follow-up, please?
Certainly. Further question.
Thank you. Would it not then be easier simply to say that the form is not necessary? I mean, it just seems like we're doing a lot of things in order to get rid of a form here, and I agree with another member of the committee earlier who said that all this didn't, as written, it doesn't seem to say that. So,
well, all this does, in essence, is we deleted the form requirement, and then we've inserted the substantive requirement for residency and or exclusively garage. So in the old days, it would just say sign the residency form, and then you'd look at the rule, and the rule had this language in it. So now, since we're getting rid of the form, we take the language from the rule and we put it in, some of it, put it in the statute. So it gives guidance as to the substantive residency requirement, which isn't different than it's always been. So we're changing, nothing's changing. And the insurance companies are fully aware of the issue of residency.
Okay, Representative Terry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Fox. Some of my questions have been answered in part by the question from Representative Abel and the responses by Mr. Fox. It's clear to me that this discussion is ranging, is broadening beyond the actual request to eliminate the form. So in that spirit, I would just like to add or ask one additional question, and that is with respect to the monitoring that the department does with respect to compliance. How many staff do you actually have that are engaged in this practice, and how aggressive is it? I believe you had indicated that it's really not much of a problem at all. So if you could address that or speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So we have what's called a market conduct unit, and that has 4 members, and then I assist. And they, in essence, we have different issues that come up, and we do examinations. So, which is the insurance companies pay for them. We go to their building, and currently we do it here. And then we do a sample of files, and we review those files, and then we ensure compliance with New Hampshire law. One of the forms or different types of exams we do, we can do underwriting exams, for example. One we do is claims exams. So in this case, we do claims exams, I would say, yearly. And, if we saw, like I know one auto insurer is coming up, and if we saw this, that we've changed the law, we get rid of the residency form, and now people who have the seem to not be from New Hampshire, then we would catch that, and then we would either correct. We might discuss it with that insurance company in what's called a corrective action order, Now that insurance company then could say, well, we think other insurance companies are having the same problem. Then we might do a bulletin, or we might come back to the legislature and say, okay, here's the new status, and here's what we think would be the best fix for this. So it's kind of been always an ongoing process. Now, layered on top of that, we also have a consumer division. And so if there was an issue, and that's how, for example, we determined that some of the direct writers were having a little bit of trouble recognizing the forms, because we had consumers call us and say, I got canceled. I should not have been canceled. I've been in New Hampshire for, my whole life. So that's how we caught that issue. So there are probably multiple ways that we catch issues that are hurting consumers. But in terms of our team, we have 4 dedicated people plus myself, and then we also have additional people we can put in place if we need to.
Okay.
Follow, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Sure. Further question?
Thank you, Mr. Fox. So thank you. So in terms of monitoring, it sounds like this is an annual exercise by sample by insurance company. Is that correct?
Well, I guess, yeah, I should say that there's another layer, complete layer that's different than the New Hampshire Insurance Department. The insurance companies also have to do reporting on a national basis, which would include New Hampshire. And we have, in addition to the 4 people I just mentioned, we also have an analyst. And the analyst, Doug Rees, he reviews all of the national data. And then if that national data indicates a problem, then he'll go to our market conduct chief, and then we'll start with an investigation. So for example, if you had an insurance company with a very high cancellation rate, we would then contact that particular insurance company, the analysis team would, and then try to figure out why is your cancellation rate so high. And that would be another way to show that the residency form has been a problem. So there are many ways to go about this, but there is national monitoring of insurance companies, which includes New Hampshire, and we get all of that data, and we have an analyst here who goes through all that data every year to try to see if there are problems.
Thank you.
Okay. We thank you very much, Mr. Fox. Chair will now call on Attorney James Hayden. Good morning, Jim. You there, Jim?
I'm here.
Okay.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Jim Hayden here testifying in support of this bill on behalf of State Farm Insurance Company, which is the nation's and perhaps New Hampshire's largest writer of automobile insurance. I too go back to when this law was put on the books in 2004. And this, this law was prompted by a former commissioner who had a house on Lake Winnipesaukee. And after he bought it, he realized that a lot of his neighbors were showing up on weekends in cars that were registered in New Hampshire. And after thinking about the situation and talking about it, he believed that there was a issue relating to non-residents registering their cars in New Hampshire and insuring them in New Hampshire, and thus put this law on the books, or asked the legislature to put this law on the books. Since that time, I've been wrestling with this law on behalf of State Farm because State Farm has a unique business practice that goes back to the inception of the company, or the beginning of the company, where it actually issues a new policy for each vehicle that you insure. So if you're somebody who buys a car for the kids, or buys a trailer, or buys a motorcycle, every time you buy another vehicle and insure another vehicle with State Farm, that triggered a residency statement that needed to be signed. And it required the consumer to come down to the local State Farm agent to sign it. State Farm has not been able to figure out how to get this form onto some kind of electronic filing or electronic signing, mostly because a lot of consumers don't really like that and don't know how to use it. But the point is, this is a form that is no longer necessary, and it remains the biggest issue with the State Farm agents in New Hampshire. And rather than being a direct writer, State Farm is actually has agents in New Hampshire that are roughly 50 or 60 of the mom and pop businesses that provide State Farm insurance throughout New Hampshire. So I even renewed a policy, or actually got a new car policy, and it was the customer service rep at my local State Farm agent actually complained about the form when she asked me to sign it, not knowing exactly who she was talking to. But she expressed interest and excitement about the fact that the legislature may do away with the form. And so I hear testify in support of all these agents who are looking closely at this because they would love to see this form disappear. The intricacy of the bill, and James explained it, is that, you know, when the way the law is written, it basically says to an insurance company or to a consumer, if you lie on this form, you can be denied coverage. And that's a pretty powerful statement. This is telling a consumer you're not going to get insurance under your policy. So because this dramatic event was tied to the policy form, you know, the department needed to create wording when they're eliminating the form that sort of loosened it up, basically telling consumers you can't lie about your residency, but they had to sort of decouple it from this form. It's true that this, to my knowledge, there's no other state in New Hampshire that has this residency requirement on its books, and the full statement that you do not get coverage if you lie about your residency. That's a pretty powerful statement from the legislature, and I haven't researched it, but I've never heard it told that other states have gone this far. But I can tell you that, you know, in the 17 years that I've been wrestling with this requirement, there's only been one claim in all that time that had a residency statement issue that we had to deal with. So over the course of 17 years, it only came up once. And, you know, I think that if you take a step back and you think through how people are moving around and how cars are being insured, I think, you know, this is a requirement. This is a concept that is long outdated, and getting rid of the form will certainly update New Hampshire laws to be more consumer friendly and more consumer compatible. And to the extent, you know, there's other aspects of residency that need to be considered, that could be for a later day. But I would encourage you to support this bill, mostly for the benefit of the agents who have to deal with it every day, and would very much look forward to removing the form as a requirement under New Hampshire law. So with that, I will end and certainly answer questions if anyone has.
Representative McAleer has a question for you.
Yes, it never really occurred to me that somebody would try to get insurance in New Hampshire to save money. But what did occur to me and does occur to me is if I have a second residence in New Hampshire, which for a long time I did, I would want to register my car in New Hampshire as opposed to Massachusetts because of the sales tax. That's a much, much bigger bite than the insurance. How do we address that? This isn't going to help us out in that sense if somebody, in fact, simply registers their car in New Hampshire to avoid the sales tax. How do we get around that?
I'm going to respectfully say that, you know, there's many issues that when you mention the word residency, it plays out in other areas, and there's other aspects of this. And, you know, this bill is very narrowly tailored to the residency form. And, you know, I don't think it goes beyond that in its present form, even though I agree with you, that could be another issue.
Great, thank you very much. I have one more person who wants to testify, and that's Bruce Berkey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you, and for your record, my name is Bruce Berkey, and I'm appearing before you today on behalf of the Professional Insurance Agents of New Hampshire, and they are opposed to Senate Bill 36 for a variety of reasons, and frankly, for some of the reasons that you've heard here this morning. Currently, an individual seeking coverage for their automobile insurance must sign this statement of residency prior to obtaining the coverage. There are a couple of exceptions. One having been mentioned, if the vehicle is garaged here in New Hampshire, and the other is for active military members. But it does make clear that anyone whose primary residence is outside of New Hampshire cannot obtain automobile insurance as a state resident, except under those specific circumstances. It's only required on the application for the automobile insurance, this form. It is not required for renewals, as I understand it. A renewal can take place uninterrupted without the need for the additional statement if no changes to residency occur. It makes the law clear to consumers. It is a legal statement, and it guarantees that every person seeking to buy automobile insurance in New Hampshire has been made aware of this law and the consequences for violating it. We have some of the lowest rates in the country. Your chairman has mentioned that, especially as it compares to Southern New England. Doing away with this law, this requirement, could potentially disrupt New Hampshire's stable and affordable automobile insurance market. The rates in the state reflect the risks of resident drivers. Altering the rating pool with non-resident drivers could change the rates for New Hampshire consumers. Carriers would still be able to deny coverage for losses by anyone who wrongfully claimed a New Hampshire residency, further disrupting the marketplace with potential increases to uninsured motorist claims. That would further risk rate increases for New Hampshire drivers, increasing the costs of automobile insurance throughout New Hampshire. Now, I never like to go against the department, but I would just like to point out that in Mr. Fox's statements, and frankly, Mr. Hatem's statements, and Jim's a personal friend of mine, but they've both said, you know, the law has been on the books since 2004, and we haven't seen a problem. That's a good thing. They've basically told my story that having this law in place, it has enabled, New Hampshire residents to access insurance here, and for Massachusetts residents not to access insurance here. If there's a problem with the form, then let's change the form. Let's update the form, both from an electronic perspective and from a clarity perspective. We're not having the rate invasion that Mr. Fox mentioned, and because we have this form in place, and so it's a protection for New Hampshire consumers. We would urge you to maintain the form, maybe maintain some of the language in the new language that's being presented for statutory purposes, and to direct the department to update the form. I'll close my testimony there, and I'd be happy to try and address any questions any members of the committee has.
We do have a question. Representative Abramson has a question.
Yeah, I've noticed that according to howmuch.net, that the average automotive insurance premium is about $100 a year lower in Vermont. If someone were shopping around, say they were in the New England market, why would they just pick a Vermont policy and save even more money? Why would this even be a problem? People buying their insurance in New Hampshire if they know they can save even more money just picking a different state.
I'm not sure if I entirely understand the question, Representative Abramson, but if you're suggesting that they would try to buy insurance in Vermont rather than New Hampshire, I guess I would defer to the Department of Insurance in Vermont and their laws with respect to how that would be addressed.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is that they don't have a summer home in Vermont. They have a summer home in New Hampshire, and that's why they want to register in New Hampshire.
Well, I'm just looking at the list. There's quite a few states around the country that have lower rates.
There's no doubt, and that the more rural the state is, the lower the rates are. That is true. So, but I would say is that at the end of the day, you've got to have a place where you're somehow garaging it, or someplace you're putting the car, or someplace the rationale that you have an address. So if you don't have any connection, I mean, I remember when we were first debating the issue was that there were some people who were registering into a PO box, and that was an issue, and that's why they wanted you had to give us a real address. You can't use a PO box. But okay, Representative Van Houten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Berkey. As I listened to you speak and looked back at the bill as it stands now, I'm struck by the fact that we are talking about the form, an elimination of the form, and yet the wording here really doesn't address the form. Do you see what I'm speaking about? And would you respond to that concern, please?
Sure. As I understand it, with the way that the bill is written, where you see in Section 2, Roman 4, the language being stricken, failure to sign the New Hampshire residency form. So there's that aspect to the bill. And then in the very last paragraph of the bill, Section 3, Roman 2, it repeals 417A3B, which is the authorization for the form, as I understand it. It's the statement of residency, and it has the form requirement built into that section of the statute.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're all set? Okay. So
but I'm sorry to be there.
Bruce, did you bring up this issue to the Senate?
We did not. We had a meeting just either last week or the week before, the insurance agents did, and that's when they took their official position in opposition to Senate Bill 36.
And you're not the independent agent, you're the professional agents, in my memory.
Professional insurance agents of New Hampshire, yes.
Okay. So you all set then, Connie, right?
I am, thank you.
You still had your hand up, okay. Okay, we thank you very much. Just when I thought we had an easy bill, it turns out it's not so easy. So having no more people signed up, I guess I should look at the attendees, make sure there's no hand pop up on me. And I will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 36. There were
Representative Terry has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Sorry, Representative Terry. Did you have a question for?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask what the man who testified, what would be the impact? Would he assess what would be the impact on this change if it were to be approved? What adverse impact?
Representative Terry, this is Bruce Berkey. I assume the question was addressed to me.
Yes, that's to you.
I'm certainly not an actuary, so I cannot give you specific numbers. But if there was a rise in claims, an increase in claims, that could have an adverse impact on the overall market within New Hampshire, and therefore have an impact on New Hampshire consumers and the rates they pay.
Follow, Mr. Chairman.
Further question?
Thank you. So this is hypothetical because there's no actuarial data. Mr. Fox testified on behalf of the insurance department that New Hampshire is the only state that has this requirement. So are you familiar with any adverse impacts in any of the other 49 states by not having this provision?
I am not, but I'd be happy to try and research that for you.
Thank you.
Good luck with that.
Thanks.
Well, that'll put those professional agents to work on this one.
That's right.
All right. Now I will close the public hearing, seeing no more hands up. and say that there were 15 support. At the time this was printed, there was none of opposition and 2 were neutral. And with that, we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 36, and we'll open up the public hearing on Senate Bill 49. And I understand that Senator D'Alessandro would not be able to make it, so I will have, yeah, Glenn. Okay, I got you. I found you, Glenn. All right, don't move on me. All right, I promote you to panelist. So Glenn Perlow will present Senate Bill 49. And good afternoon, or morning, excuse me. It got me all confused.
You're speaking to me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I am, Glenn. You're on.
Good morning. Am I a proxy for introducing this bill?
Yes, thank you. I thought Lou told you that you were going to do that. But
oh yeah, no, I just didn't know if Senator Bradley might have been coming. So no, happy to do that.
No, if Senator Bradley's here, but go ahead.
Absolutely, happy to do so. For the record, my name is Glenn Perlow. I'm General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer at Jordan Park Trust Company, and I'm also President of the New Hampshire Trust Council. I am a registered lobbyist, and I'm here to speak in favor of Senate Bill 49. Mr. Chairman, if possible, could I ask that my colleague Patrick Collins also be given an opportunity to share the mic?
Well, I'll tell you what, since you want to share the mic, let's have Senator Bradley speak first because he is here.
He is here, thank you.
And so we'll let him speak, and then you can, and who's the person you want to bring
Patrick
up?
Collins, and he should be on the line.
Oh, I see him, yep, okay,
Thank
go
you very
ahead.
much.
And good morning, Senator Bradley. You just have to unmute yourself, Jim.
There we go. Sorry about that. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commerce Committee. Senator D'Alessandro could not be here this morning, so he asked me to sub for him. I just want to thank Chairman Hunt for joining with myself and Senator Dee over the years to update our trust laws in New Hampshire. We have tried to make this state a very friendly state to be able to locate a trust. We're in competition with states like Delaware in particular, but also South Dakota and Florida for the kind of jobs that come with trust being incorporated in a state. So I'm just going to stop there because I think Mr. Perlow probably can go through the particulars of the bill for you better than I can. But I think the big picture is that we have had a number of trust companies located in New Hampshire. These are good jobs, and we should continue to be at the cutting edge of what makes a state attractive for trust. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on this issue too.
No problem, thank you. Okay, so now I will call on Patrick Collins. Since we don't have a tag team, we can't have two at the desk at the same time. So good morning, Mr. Collins.
Good morning. I think Glenn is going to, if it's okay, kick it off, and then I'm going to be more of a available for questions to help with any technical pieces, but Glenn can give a good overview of the general.
Okay.
I seem to still be on and mic'd. So.
Yes, I see you're both good. The mics are on. Yes. Okay. Go
Excellent.
Ahead.
Thanks very much. Before I begin, let me echo one thing Senator Bradley said, and I think I mentioned this briefly when I had the opportunity to introduce myself several months ago to the committee, but I would want to reiterate that we've presented this committee with empirical data regarding job growth and all of that in the past couple of years. But I can definitely speak anecdotally to our trust company. Jordan Park Trust Company previously was Perspective Trust Company, was established in 2007. And we recently were acquired by a much larger registered investment advisor out of San Francisco with offices in New York and now New Hampshire. And not only is our census scheduled to grow as we simply take on new business, but also it's very clear that this company is hiring in New Hampshire and citing people for our sister investment advisor company. And that's precisely what we've been after. With that said, the other thing I said the last time we spoke was we're sensitive to two things, what you're challenged with in terms of the COVID pandemic and getting through legislation, but also we're sensitive to criticism in the past that we've been very energetic in providing you with reams of paper. So I'm happy to point out that this is a 2-page bill. It's very targeted and it is designed to help settlers of trust, beneficiaries of trust, and also enable trustees to do a better job for them. So quickly, the first section of the bill, and I did provide the written testimony, which goes into a little bit more detail, but the first section deals with representation, which is when you have beneficiaries who may be underage, maybe special needs, or in some other way need someone to represent their interests with regard to a trust. This simply expands a list of 7 different folks with different characteristics to also include the person who settled the trust in terms of giving them the opportunity to name a trusted friend, an organization, someone to assert representation. And we just think this is a miss that should have been there all along. Secondly, and this one is really an administrative efficiency issue. Very often, older trusts that have provisions that are more difficult to follow or have some other change that ought to be made are decanted or poured into a second trust. And it's not been clear under New Hampshire law whether or not you need to create a new trust. And when you create a new trust, obviously that's extra expense in terms of drafting that, but also then you're required to go out and get a new federal tax number for the trust. So what this will allow is several variations of that theme that add some efficiency by allowing you to use an existing trust and not necessarily changing the tax number. It's consistent with federal law, and it gives some flexibility to save some money and time. And finally, the last section, very often, particularly in a trust where the grantor is no longer involved, a settlor, or they've passed away, you've got beneficiaries, and the trust never said exactly how things should be invested. But you may have a group of beneficiaries who are like-minded, and it may be that there's a specific company they want to invest in, or they may want to invest in, not invest in a category of companies. And what this allows is a settlement agreement amongst the beneficiaries, only in certain circumstances, but it allows them to give a directive to the trustee, and it says, if you invest as directed by this group of beneficiaries, and that is not optimal in terms of return, you're not on the hook as a fiduciary because you were directed under the law. So in a nutshell, that's the bill. If anyone would like to deep dive on any of that, Patrick will be better equipped to do that. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, seeing no direct questions, we'll go right to Mr. Collins.
Yeah, I think Glenn generally, thank you for having me. I think Glenn generally wants me here just in case there are any technical questions. I don't have anything further to add to his general overview of the bill.
Okay. Okay, so any members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, we thank you. We do have Representative McAleer.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, if I might. Would a family LLC fit into the definition of a trust under this law and actually under existing New Hampshire laws?
I'm gonna suggest that you're asking about a family trust company in an LLC form.
Correct.
Directly, none of this legislation addresses that as a company that it's in and of itself is not a trust. And this legislation is all addressing New Hampshire Trust Code provisions.
Second question, how long can a family trust or go on in New Hampshire? Is it perpetual, or is there a final generational stop?
there is no final generational stop under the either chartered or self-regulated family trust companies are perpetual like any other company in New Hampshire.
Just to add to that question, so would that include an LLC then, or not?
Yeah, yes, a family trust company in the form of an LLC has no particular time limit, and trusts, which a family trust company exists to administer for the family, those trusts can exist in perpetuity under New Hampshire law. That's a major feature of New Hampshire law.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was the sponsor of the repeal of rule of perpetuity, and that was a long time ago. So
we appreciate it.
That was one of my first trust bills that I put in. And so Representative Herbert, you have a question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is, I don't want to go sideways here, but the fiduciary responsibility, it sounded to me as though the beneficiaries could instruct a fiduciary to make an investment that may not be all that wise. And so, if I heard correctly, the fiduciary has the ability to not be involved or not be a fiduciary. You know what I'm saying? Because a fiduciary, to me, has a certain meaning in terms of their responsibility towards the family or the beneficiaries. And this law apparently brings up the issue of being a fiduciary in conflict with the beneficiary's desires to make an investment of some sort. I mean, is that, are you still a fiduciary if that happens?
Patrick, I see you've unmuted. I'd be happy to start the answer to this question, but I think Patrick may be able to help out as well. So a fiduciary, yes, is the short answer to are you still a fiduciary? And a trustee in New Hampshire and many places can take many forms. And in some cases, you are a directed trustee with a more limited set of fiduciary duties. And in this case, essentially, this is directing that fiduciary, and it's really an exception to the prudent investor rule. So if you look at how how the actual language of the legislation fits in, under the prudent investor rule, there are a series of exceptions. Cases, or not exceptions, I shouldn't say, but factors that the fiduciary can and should take into account when deciding on investing, for example. And in this case, what it's saying is, if there is, you can concentrate, for example, the situation maybe that the trust owns a business, and it is completely rational that the purpose of the trust is to own that business. That is a concentration of the assets of the trust in one investment, which would ordinarily be, against the general fiduciary duty. Fiduciaries generally spread out investments; they're avoiding loss, but it's circumstantially allowed because in many circumstances that's the appropriate thing to do. So what this is saying is, first of all, there's no certainty that this type of investing, there's no evidence that it's better or worse from a return standpoint, but it's saying that this is a factor that you can take into account. So if you're directed to do this, you can do this, and it's not a violation of your fiduciary duty. But it certainly doesn't relieve you of being a fiduciary.
Yeah, I would only add, that's well said, Glenn. I would only add that in a trust context, the fiduciary, which is the trustee, owes a fiduciary duty to two groups of people. One is the settlor of the trust, and that is to carry out the terms of the trust. If there are specific investment instructions, they have to follow those instructions. The second group is to the beneficiaries. And what this law is doing is saying, if the beneficiaries unite and say, hey, we want to invest in ESG related investments. We don't want to have investments for fossil fuels or so on and so forth. if they combine and in an agreement with them and the trustees, the fiduciary duty in that context is effectively modifying the traditional duties under the prudent investor rule to allow for this investment. Only if they're all in it together, all the beneficiaries agree that this is a an investment that they want, and so it's changing the fiduciary duty in that context, but only from the parties who would be affected by that decision.
And also only if it in no way is adverse to any material terms of the trust. So if the settlor, contrary to the wishes of the beneficiary, had set out that there shall be a concentration, or you shall never let go of that Exxon stock that made this fortune, then you couldn't do this because that would be a material term of the trust, and this would be contrary. So it's really only where the situation is everybody who should have a say has got on the same page and said, this is how we'd like to do it, and we're willing to take the risk.
So what happens if the beneficiaries want to spend down and say, okay, we just want to dissolve this thing? Can they say we want to cash out?
That's a sort of whole other question unrelated to this legislation, but Patrick, I would defer to you.
Yeah, typically this bill here is not allowing the beneficiaries to unite in that way and say, we'd rather have this money in our hands than in the trust. You can't do that by virtue of this bill. Certainly they could try to do that under other provisions of the trust code, but the trust code is pretty limiting in allowing a beneficiary to basically unwind the trust and terminate it earlier than was contemplated by
the nature of the investment, not necessarily
exactly
spend it.
Exactly.
Right, Mr. Chairman. It happens that the statutory provision in which this makes sense to insert it is using a mechanism of a non-judicial settlement agreement, and there are a variety of circumstances where things can be changed, but always within the four corners of the trust.
Fair enough. Representative Fargo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we going to hear any testimony from the banking commissioner or the banking department in this?
Evidently, they have not signed up for this bill.
But if I may, Representative Fargo, we follow a pretty strict process, as they do, and we sort of all do together, of stakeholder information and involvement. And so this was provided to the banking department and discussed, now I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, and also provided to well over 50 trust and estates attorneys who gather together to look at legislation. Also, I've worked with the charitable trust director on some of the specific language, which you can spot in the statute or in the legislation. And the Bankers Association was also part of our stakeholder discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Abel.
Yes, thank you both for testifying and explaining things. Of all the areas that perhaps this committee covers, for many of us, including me, trusts are one of the harder ones to completely understand. My question is, what was the impetus for this bill, for introducing this bill? And what are the problems? What are things that are prevented from being done now that this bill would solve? I guess, what problems are we solving here? Thank you.
I'll speak to the impetus, and I'll let Patrick speak as a practitioner to the problems. But we as an organization, the Trust Council, we collect and we think on both our existing trust code and what's going on here, and then of course we watch other states. Sometimes that's kind of an arms race thing, but most often it's not. Most often it's an active profession with a lot of dialogue and constantly looking for ways to lubricate the system so it's easier for settlers and clients, and also just to fix up anything that somebody may see an issue with. these three provisions came from sort of three different quarters. And I can tell you with regard to the ESG, the third major provision, this is something that several members of the Trust Council are finding just more and more of their clients are asking, hey, can we do something about how things are invested? And so this was floated and vetted and seemed to be an opportunity for clarity so that trustees can meet their clients' needs. Patrick, I'll let you go maybe through each quickly as to what it does for a client, particularly obviously for the client, the settlor and or beneficiaries.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, Representative Abel. I think the first one dealing with representation is trying to avoid the spoiled child. And we have a provision in the trust code currently that allows for what are called quiet trusts that allow a trustee to not disclose the terms or the assets in a trust to really beneficiaries until, usually they reach a certain age or some life event. What is missing is that while that beneficiary doesn't know what's going on intentionally to try to avoid, the spoiled child syndrome, we don't have a provision that allows somebody to be representing them while they're in the dark, if you will. So this allows someone to represent the beneficiary's interest while they're not aware of the trust's existence. So we think this is a good beneficiary rights provision. The second one for decanting, which is a procedure whereby you take the assets of one trust and decant them into a second trust, usually to modernize or update the trust provisions. There's a procedural nuance that's not clear in the statute as to whether or not you need to actually create a second trust, meaning a trust with a different name, which would require that you retitle all the assets, which can be a cumbersome, time-consuming, expensive process. So this is saying, look, if you do a decanting, you can keep the same name of the trust. You don't have to retitle everything and go through all that rigmarole. And you can also keep the same tax ID number, so you don't have to file a whole separate tax return, so on and so forth. So just makes that process more efficient. And then the third one, I think Glenn spoke to, which is just trying to find a way to, on the one hand, from a marketing standpoint, make New Hampshire, again, an attractive state. I don't know of any other state that has specifically put into their trust code a provision or a statute that allows for ESG investing through a non-judicial settlement agreement. So it will highlight New Hampshire as a unique state in that context. And secondly, to serve the clients of New Hampshire trust companies that are specifically looking for this as a way to provide more flexibility and selfishly, on behalf of the trust company, to limit the liability that a trustee may otherwise be confronted with in making an ESG investment that might run counter to the prudent investor rule without such an agreement in place.
Patrick, you want to explain what ESG means? Because I'm sure not everybody knows.
Yeah, so it's a type of investment that is focused on environmental, social, and governance objectives. So it's really, to give a practical example, it's those people that want to have an investment that is not furthering some environmental aspect of in the world. So for example, it may say we don't want to be invested in fossil fuels. So we want to make a directive that the trust not further fossil fuel investments and instead invest in environmentally friendly companies.
If I might add, though, it's broader than that, and I think it's easy because it's got this label: environmental, social, governance. More and more, the dialogue is about governance and liability risk that certain large corporations bring. And so, for sophisticated investors, there's more of a focus these days get really into the nuts and bolts of a company. Is that company run in a manner that I like? So it is not left or right or progressive, or it could be anything. It's the concentration, the directive to do an investment that's very specific, as opposed to, you know, a broad-based kind of mutual fund type of investing. That's often the case when you're just preserving the trust asset.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee members? Okay, seeing none, no hands going up. Okay, so we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 49. We had 10 in support, no opposition. There was one person who was neutral. And with that, we will close that public hearing and then get to the two exciting ones. Okay, so we'll open up Senate Bill 68. And I did see Senator Hennessy over there. Senator Hennessy, you want to raise your hand so I can you'll pop to the top for me? There you go. Thank you. Okay, so you were under Senator. That's why I didn't see you. Okay, good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Chairman Hunt and honorable members of the House Commerce Committee. Good to see you all again. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 68, requiring an employer to provide reasonable accommodations for pregnant employees. This was one of the bills that faced a pandemic death last year in the House. Sorry, my dog all of a sudden wants to come up. And I am reintroducing it. It had overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate and is one of the governor's priorities. You should have in your email inbox a letter of support from Governor Sununu for this bill. And what it does is it requires employers in the state to provide reasonable accommodations to help women stay in the workforce longer. It helps women maintain a healthy pregnancy. It helps improve job retention for women in the state. It helps bolster New Hampshire's economy. It helps ultimately attract younger generations to come to New Hampshire, stay in New Hampshire, and all sorts of wonderful things. It does have an out for employers if there's on line 9 and 10 in the bill, it says unless each employer can demonstrate that the accommodation would impose an undue hardship on the operation of the employer's business. But this bill would put into law things, the accommodations, and these accommodations can be very simple things like allowing more bathroom breaks during a work period. It can allow more shorter breaks. It can allow extra water breaks. It can allow having a bottle of water at their workstation. And a lot of these things can be worked out between the employer and the employee. And I think it's just good overall legislation for New Hampshire. And I'd also like to thank the Executive Director Malachi from the Commission on Human Rights and the Attorney General's Office for all their hard work on the Senate side and helping to listen to all of the outside concerns, some of which were outside of New Hampshire, and to make sure that the wording of this bill is what's best for New Hampshire. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, we do. We have several questions. Representative Van Houten. You have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties in so many ways today, and I apologize for that. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this to us. I have a question about the wording. The intent and some of the examples you gave, as simple as just allowing for hydration during work, are very important. And yet the bill itself, as stated here, talks about a period of temporary physical disability. Would you respond to the need for that wording, please?
The period of temporary disability, that refers to or permit a female employee to take leave of absence. So that refers to a leave of absence and not to reasonable accommodations in the actual work environment.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Burrows.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I appreciate and support the intent of the bill. I'm just wondering, the wording is just so, I don't know what the word to use, nebulous. I'm just wondering how this is going to be enforced. I mean, how long could is a temporary leave of absence, and what specific reasonable accommodations would an employer need to make? It's just so wide open that I just wonder if it has any teeth to it. So I was wondering if you could respond to that.
Well, there may be other people on the line that could respond to the how long, but there's temporary disability laws in the state, and I don't know all of those. But as far as what a reasonable accommodation is, that the wording has been vetted by different business groups, by the AG's office, by the Human Rights Commission, and this is the wording that everyone agreed on. And in the maybe the vagueness of it is that everyone's reasonable accommodation is going to be different. If I am a person that's a cashier and doing checkout all day long, my reasonable accommodation may be a high top stool that I can sit on, or a water bottle at my checkout station. If I am a person who is doing heavy lifting and in a warehouse facility, my reasonable accommodation may be a temporary change of workspace to do data entry instead of heavy lifting. So it's different for everyone, and that's why specifics can't be addressed in the bill.
Follow up, please.
Further question, may inquire.
So just a hypothetical, if a woman feels a reasonable accommodation that needs frequent bathroom breaks, I mean, like 2 an hour, let's just say that, and the employer doesn't feel that's reasonable, how does that get resolved?
The resolution would go through the Commission for Human Rights, I believe, and that can be confirmed by Director Malachi when she speaks later.
Thank you.
Representative Abramson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for introducing this bill. I'm looking at the undue hardship, and it looks like the burden is put on the employer. How much is the undue hardship? Is it an amount of money, $10,000 net per employee, or is it? I mean, how's it calculated? How can it be made predictable?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it would be different in everyone's case, and it would follow through the Commission on Human Rights process. So they might be able to answer that question, but I think it would be different for every employer.
Okay, follow up.
Further question, may inquire.
Not to completely change gears, but if the burden does become too high on employers, with this bill as written, would it make it tougher for women of childbearing age to find work, especially in management or specialist position, medical specialist, or some other condition?
I don't believe so.
Okay, Representative Greason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for your testimony this morning. My question is, how much of a problem is it for pregnant employees to be able to discuss with their employer some sort of extra break or something like that? To me, it seems foreign to mistreat my employees. I've had pregnant employees in the past, and it just was foreign to me to deny them restroom breaks or water at their station. So how much of a widespread problem is this that we need to codify this into law?
I don't believe the problem is widespread in New Hampshire, and I agree. I think we have some great employers out there. This is to put into law that New Hampshire appreciates pregnant women and will help to accommodate their needs in the workplace. And if there is an instance where a woman cannot come to agreement with her employer, that this is what the reason is for. And someone else on the line may be able to go further into your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Chairman Hunt. Thank you,
You'll
committee.
stick around for the next bill, I think. Okay.
Back to education.
Okay. Now, so we have Ms. Malachi. All right, there you are. Okay. All right, so she is the last one here, so she'll wrap it up, and I assume you'll attempt to answer some of these questions that have been left or out there. So, good morning.
I'm sorry. Yes, good morning. This is Ani Malachi. The screen went blank and then I'm back again. So am I testifying now?
You're on. You're live.
Okay, very good. I'll turn my camera on here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very, very much, Chairman Hunt, and for the rest of the committee members. Thank you and good morning. Before I go into responses relative to SB 68, I just wanted to go over a few things. Some of you I've seen in other committees before, but I wanted to give a little background as to the commission and what we do, and some of that may answer some of the questions that you've asked and or may provide answers for questions you haven't asked as of yet. So as I said before, my name is Ani Malachi, and I'm the Executive Director for the Commission for Human Rights. The Commission is a state agency, and we have been established by RSA 354-A for the purposes of eliminating discrimination in the state of New Hampshire in employment, housing, places of public accommodation, and as recently as 2019, K-12 education was added to our statute. The commission is comprised of 7 volunteer commissioners who provide oversight and make decision on charges of discrimination. And each commissioner is appointed by the governor with the consent of the executive council for a term of 5 years. The commission has the power to receive, investigate, and pass upon complaints of illegal discrimination and to engage in research, education, and community outreach designed to prevent discrimination in the state. In addition to the powers vested in the commission by RSA 354-A to enforce New Hampshire's laws against discrimination, the commission also partners with the EEOC, which is the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, to enforce federal laws prohibiting discrimination in employment. And we have a very small staff, so we cover the entire state of New Hampshire with our small staff. So we have 5 investigators, myself as the executive director. We have an assistant director and recently hired a paralegal. And we also have limited admin staff. So one of the things I wanted to go over relative to SB 68 is in cooperation with last session with Senator Jeb Bradley, we constructed this bill. Now, SB 68, what it will do is codify what the commission has done since 1965 when we were established. Pregnancy is something that we take charges on. It's not rampant, but we do take charges of discrimination in this area currently. So what SB 68 does is it puts it answers the question and speaks specifically to what we do relative to pregnancy, puts it all in one place, makes it easy for people to find. And I'm not sure, were there any additional questions for me? Oh, and of course we do support SB 68 as we did work with Senator Bradley to construct it. And then I worked closely with Senator Hennessy this session to move this forward, as well as the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force. They have been established as a nonprofit since, well, they're a grassroots organization. I think pretty recently are considered a nonprofit now, but they've been around since 1997, and they've worked on legislation. They've worked with businesses, they've worked with hospitals and moms, et cetera, to further the charge of breastfeeding, lactation, and assistance for mothers in the state. So I'll rest it there and answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Representative Van Houten has a question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your testimony today. There has been some previous concern in just the last few minutes about some of the language in the bill. And I do recognize that some of the language is nebulous. What is reasonable, for instance? And my reference to disability when we're talking about pregnancy. And I think I recognize that that almost has to be. Does this legislation, should it pass, give you any kind of regulatory authority so that you will be able to interpret how this wording impacts those employers and employees?
Thank you very much, Representative Van Houten, for the question. We have statutory authority as it stands right now. So we are the enforcement agency for any charge of discrimination in New Hampshire. So I apologize, I neglected to share this. If there's a charge of discrimination in any of those areas that I mentioned that we have jurisdiction, so employment, housing, public accommodation, and K through 12 education, you come to us first. So K through 12 is a little different. I'm trying not to be too confusing or too wordy here. You do have an opportunity to go to court instead, but in employment and housing, education, customarily, you come to us first. So you don't go to court, you file your charge with us, and then we move forward from there. So with that being said, what the language is in SB 68 is the language that we use currently to take any charges in this area. So what we've done is pull the language from a couple of different spots, put it all into one so that it will be in one area, if that makes sense. And to your point, it does have to be a little vague because as Senator Hennessy so eloquently stated, one person's accommodation is not the other person's accommodation. And what happens is the law of unintended consequences. The more specific you are, the more people you potentially leave out. So you certainly don't want it to be too vague, but you also want enough of an explanation so that when someone is looking something up, they have a guidance, they have parameters. And if I were pregnant and I'm at my job and I'm working with the HR person, and it's now time for me to go on leave because it's right before my due date, and then I'll be out on leave. These are some of the same terms that you would use in a business, in an HR setting. So it's synonymous. So it helps everyone to say the same thing and mean the same thing. I hope that answers your question.
It does. May I follow up, please?
Further question, may inquire.
Thank you. What kinds of consequences would be available for you to mete out? Would it be corrective action for the employer, or what kinds of consequences or directions are available to you should you find culpability?
Yes, thank you for the question. So a person will come to us and say, I've been wronged, and they will share what that is if it meets if it's within our jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is a handful of things, as long as it is within the time frame. So there's a 180-day statute of limitations from the last action that happened to the individual. And if it's something that we cover, so if it's someone who's incarcerated, for example, that would not be within our jurisdiction. Okay, so for this example, the woman is saying, I'm not being given bathroom breaks, and then they reach out to us. The first thing we do is, have you reached out to if it's a floor manager, have you talked to the manager above that person? Have you reached out to HR? No, I haven't. Okay, thank you for letting us know. Reach back out to the company, but contact us and let us know if you don't get satisfaction. I reached out to my company. They're refusing to do this. It's in writing somewhere that I can't have these bathroom breaks. Okay, then we'll take your charge. We take the individual's charge, and then we docket that information, and then we send written information of this charge of discrimination to the business, and they have an opportunity to give a response to that. So let's say that we have found that there has been discrimination, that the woman went through the proper chain of command, because that's important, to request the bathroom breaks the additional bathroom breaks that she was needing, She was denied that. And so let's say we've moved forward and we have now found probable cause for this, for the individual who's filed this charge of discrimination. So along the way, there's mediation that's possible. If the business and the individual are willing to mediate, the woman may say, listen, I filed this so that I could get them to honor what I need, but I don't really want to go through all of this. I just need bathroom breaks. And so if we're able to mediate something and work it out with the company, then we're happy to do that. Our mediation program is free, and we offer that for every charge that makes sense to offer mediation. So with that being said, there could be fines. The individual may have financial compensation that they're looking for if they've lost wages, if they've lost time from work, if they got fired or something along those lines. And so those things are included in the outcomes that they're looking for with their charge. And of course, when the investigator investigates, one of those things that they may suggest is that there be a policy on pregnancy and related conditions. So I hope that answered your question.
It does, thank you. And one more quick follow-up.
Okay, one further question.
In your opinion, then, this legislation would help to facilitate the fair and reasonable process that you've just documented for us?
Thank you very much for the follow-up, Representative. And yes, in my opinion, it would do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Abramson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I guess on this, if I'm a small employer, if I'm a small business, and I don't have the regulatory consultants and the lawyer on retainer and whatnot, how do I figure out how much is an undue hardship? Is it capped at $10,000 per employee, or what is it?
Thank you, Representative Abramson, for the question. So undue hardship, it could be a variety of things. So for example, and let's use the example that Senator Hennessy gave. If I work in a warehouse, I'm a pregnant woman, I work in a warehouse, and what I'm requesting, my doctor is saying I can only lift 10 pounds, whereas I usually could lift 25 pounds. So I go to the employer and I say, I have a weightlifting restriction, and it's only 10 pounds. And then the employer says, oh, okay, well, we can change your shift, or we can move you to a different area in the warehouse to accommodate the 10-pound lift, or we can slightly change what you do during your regular shift to accommodate you. I might say, well, thank you for that, but I'm not interested in doing that. I'd much rather work in this area over here where there's no lifting at all, or I'd rather go to a different plant, or I would rather not work during this time, during the entire pregnancy. So, or I can come in, but I won't lift anything. But if you could have this other employee do all of the lifting, then I would much rather prefer that. So here's the impasse. What the employee is specifically needing is the weight restriction for the 10 pounds per the doctor. What the employer has offered is several ways to accommodate that employee that fall within what's available for the employer, what they can afford to do, and it doesn't change anything. They're doing their portion to accommodate the employee. The employee has decided that they don't like the accommodation, and so they want someone else to fulfill their complete job description, and they either don't do their job description at all, or go to a plant or somewhere completely different that doesn't work for the employer. So all of this is an interactive process. They work together. And so it could be an undue hardship for the employer to hire someone different, to offer overtime for someone else to do the work that this particular employee could have done with the accommodation. So every workspace, each employer is a little different, and there are different things that could be considered undue hardships. And how this really works is, if the employer has a question, although the commission is the enforcement agency, we're neutral. We are not attorneys that represent a complainant. We also do not represent the respondent. If the responding business has a question, they can call us when they receive this information that they've been charged with, discrimination. They can call us and go, I don't really understand what's happening here. Can you explain this? And well, we have documentation that says we offered this as an accommodation and the person refused it, and now we're being charged with discrimination. Okay, send that documentation in as your response, and then we go through it that way. So we don't offer legal advice. We can give people information on our process, and we work to remain neutral in the process and to, as much as you can, give information on the process without it being representation, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping that I answered your question, Representative.
Follow-up?
Further question may inquire.
Okay, if I'm an employer and I have a small shop or real estate job or financial industry or software development, I need to hire a specialist for one position. They're irreplaceable. And I'm looking at an applicant who is a woman of childbearing age. If I hire her, what is the most amount of money that this cost me for it to be an undue hardship under this? In other words, what's the downside? If I hire this person, what's the worst amount of money that I'm going to have to spend under this bill?
Okay, and thank you for the redirection. And allow me to clarify. So undue hardship is not necessarily qualified by an amount of money. So it's not just a dollar amount. It's what is it that you're having to do to attempt to make this accommodation? And so these are the variables that we use every day in general, right? So this is how we make these determinations now. So it's not, oh, this business has, 20 employees, and so an undue hardship is considered a $10,000 or a $5,000 expenditure. That's not what it is. It's what is reasonable to accommodate this individual. So my lawyer friends will appreciate this. If we all make widgets and we're standing on the widget making line, and this person has an accommodation that they need, and they need a stool to sit on, the employer can get them a very comfortable stool to sit on, to use that as needed on the widget making line. But the employee is saying, I don't want that one. I want the solid gold one that when I clap, it'll lift me up and scoot me down to the next side and throw away my trash for me. That's the one I want. Well, the employer is not under any obligation to purchase the solid gold, can move with clapping of hands chair. They are responsible for purchasing or providing something that is a reasonably expected to assist this person or to accommodate them to meet the needs of the job description, and making sure that that person can still satisfy the essential elements of their job.
So let's say you have a warehouse job that is seasonal, and it's around, for Christmas, and we need a lot of help in the warehouse. And is that the employer says, well, what I need you for is the warehouse, and if you can't lift, then this is not going to work. So all I can do is lay you off. And the employee says, well, I don't want to be laid off because I'm going to get less money. My compensation is going to be less. I don't want to be laid off. How do you fall down on that side? Who gets the reasonable settlement?
Right. So thank you for the question, Representative Hunt. So ultimately, all of this is an interactive process. So from beginning to end, employee, employer are working together to find a reasonable solution to whatever it is that the employee is requesting. So when you have a reasonable accommodation for anything under the ADA, as well as it relates to SB 68, if there is something that the employer can provide or assist the employee with to allow them to continue the functions of the job. So yes, it's a warehouse job, but what the employer may have to do is be creative. Is there a different area in the warehouse that the person can work for a period of time? Can the shift be moved so that maybe the morning shift has lighter weight items, whereas the afternoon shift has heavier items? And so what the employee and the employer are to do is to work collaboratively to look for a solution. If there is no way for the employer to maintain the employee's status because there is no other shift, it's only an 8-hour day and we only have this, there is no other place, then as long as there is really no accommodation that could meet to allow the employee to meet the essential functions of that position, if that person has to be let go, because it's not reasonable to hire you and Representative Abramson to do my job, right? So if you're paying me, I have to do my job. If I can do it with an accommodation, great. And it's usually only for a limited amount of time anyway, right? And so if there is no way and that person has to be furloughed or something, and sometimes you may do well, we need to lay you off for 6 months or 3 months or whatever, but we want you to come back because there just isn't anything, then that could be, and that person may feel that they are wronged, but it's something to remember that every wrong isn't actionable. If the employer has followed the letter of the law, if they have worked collaboratively with the employee to look for a reasonable solution, and there just isn't one to be found, if that person must be furloughed, they're a great employee and you want them to stay with you, you just don't have anything for now, then that's how that works. Unfortunately, nothing is perfect.
Right. So, and then to follow up on Representative Abramson's previous questions, because it's always been said that employers generally don't hire women because they are childbearing. And do you fear at all that this is going to accelerate that or accentuate that this be a temptation for employers not to hire women simply because they're fearful of having to go through this process to have to defend why they can't keep this person while they're pregnant?
And thank you, Representative Hunt, for the follow-up. So what's in SB 68 is the way that the commission operates to this day. So this does not change how we do business, as it were. So SB 68 is no different than how we've been operating with employers in the state for 50 plus years. So there should be no expectation that an employer would do something adverse based on the language in SB 68. You could go to our website now and find this language. And if you look at any cases that we have published on our website that deal with pregnancy, and we don't have a lot of those. So that's a good sign that we don't have a lot. But that being said, there should be no expectation that employers would be prone to being less receptive to women of childbearing age as they in the way that they are now. So there should be no concern with that. We aren't concerned that it would create some adverse action towards pregnant women or women in the age group of pregnancy. And that's changed now. We have a 57-year-old that recently gave birth in New Hampshire. So
a teacher too, yeah.
Right, childbearing age is a different thing now.
Okay. Representative Johnson has a question.
Thank you for taking my question. So my concern is that if this really isn't an issue in, I've worked for many different businesses from small to large. If the employers are already working with their employees, why do we need a law on the books telling them what to do when they're already doing it. And if it's already being handled and worked with and communicated and, collaborative with the employee and employers and the employees, why do we need a law telling them what to do what they're already doing?
Representative Johnson, thank you very much for the question. So you have new employers that start all the time, and you have new employees that begin all the time, correct? And you also have people who've never been pregnant before that will become pregnant, and so these could be concerns. So even though overall we've had very positive outcomes. We've not had a plethora of pregnancy cases. It doesn't hurt to codify this into law so that it's very clear in one area of our statute as it relates to pregnancy. We want to make sure that it's very clear and concise and easy to find.
Is there any other questions for Representative Amerson? I hope you have one question.
Well, it was actually more of clarifying my remarks. I'm trying to break the glass ceiling. So for the next generation of women, I understand, Mr. Chair, the factory floor and making widgets and having to put a chair in. But what about a young woman who wants to become junior vice president or a medical specialist or a database specialist or something where it's just one position in that company, especially for small businesses where you only have one person in that position? It's very hard to make accommodations for that. And it feels like this bill, the way it's written, the uncertainty, as is that this would just be yet another obstacle for women who are trying to move up into a position in a company where there's only just that one position. I mean, that's why I'm saying, is there some way we can rewrite this so that this doesn't put an undue burden on them or on their employer or a small business, on new startups? That's why I'm thinking, maybe put a cap on it so it's something that's certain. $5,000, $10,000. Obviously, that they could accommodate with a chair or adjusting their schedule or more bathroom breaks. But if they can have an actual dollar figure of some kind, then they know this is the limit of how much of a burden this is going to place on the company. And they can calculate it and they can make that decision when they're hiring or promoting people.
Representative Hunt, if I may respond to that.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. And I really do appreciate your concerns, Representative Abramson. I hear what you're saying. The difficulty with doing something along those lines is that every accommodation is not something that's financial. So it may not entail it may not entail providing a financial incentive or purchasing an item. It could be a $20 chair. It could be just allowing more bathroom breaks. It could be that the person may need a longer lunch period because after they eat, they have to, they need to take a rest or something because there's some other physical situation. So those are things that don't require money. And a large amount of these things are things that don't require money at all. So in putting in something, a financial piece, what it opens up an area that isn't really necessary. And I promise you, I hear your concerns because you're wanting to make sure that a business can understand in a financial way what a reasonable accommodation is. However, a large majority of reasonable accommodations may not require money at all. So it leaves it to the commission, as we are the enforcement agency, to extrapolate what reasonable is. And as Senator Hennessy said, each person's reasonable is a little different, or each person's request is a little different. One person's reasonable accommodation is literally just a stool to sit on, or extra bathroom breaks. Someone else is reasonable is that they need an office that's closer to the elevator. So it doesn't mean that a business is expected to purchase or build out a new office, but what can we empty out this room, clean it up, and make this the office for that particular employee. So what it does by not putting a dollar amount, it gives the commission flexibility to entertain what is reasonable, what is a reasonable standard with this particular situation. Because if I am, for example, if I'm an unreasonable employee and there's a dollar amount put on there, then it says, well, I'm only asking for something that's $2,000. It's not 10, and that's the limit. So you should be able to grant this. But that $2,000 request might not financially, let's say that might not be unreasonable, but what they're asking for is unreasonable. When they were offered something that was perfectly reasonable, but because it wasn't what the employee wanted, we don't judge reasonableness by what I would prefer. Of course, I'd prefer an Easy Boy lounge chair, but the business is not required to provide that for me. They're required to provide a reasonable accommodation, a comfortable chair for which I need to sit. They're not required to purchase a $1,200 or $2,000 chair. And so I completely understand what you're asking. However, by adding dollar amounts in there, I think we start to change the conversation. And we've not had, to my recollection, and I can double check this and certainly get back to you, we've not had a reasonable accommodation in a pregnancy case where there was some huge dollar amount. I mean, it's usually small things that are needed. And some cases are solved with mediation once a lot of times it's small businesses that just aren't sure what they're supposed to do. So through conversation, they understand, oh, okay, well, I can do this or I should do this. And we assist in making that clear.
Representative Petrusik, do you have a question?
It's a would you believe?
Okay. Well, I just realized that I screwed up. There were two people who were in opposition to the bill, and I somehow missed them. So maybe we should hear from them. Or unless you want to go ahead with your would you believe?
Ms. Malachi, would you believe? I now have a better understanding of reasonableness. That was my main question when I went through this and when you started, but now I have a much better understanding of reasonables. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Welcome. You're welcome.
So, so is Sarah Brahman or Kate Frederick, do you guys still want to speak? I see that you were in opposition to the bill. So just raise your hand if you would like to speak. Okay. I can't believe I did this, but this is an imperfect science. Okay, so Kate Frederick. And you just have to unmute yourself. I am sorry, that I thought I had everything, and I apologize.
No worries. I'm still available if there are any other questions or if there's some redirection that's needed. Thank you.
Great. Yes. So go ahead, Ms. Frederick.
Hi, Chairman Hunt. It's so good to see you again. I wish I was in the hearing committee room with you all. My name is Kate Frederick. And I am opposing this bill because I think it's too vague. And I think it'll cause a lot of confusion for employers to know what they're supposed to do and what they don't have to do. And I think it'll cause conflict for employees who think they have a right, but maybe don't, or have a right, but can't prove it because everything's too vague. I am a current student of Vermont Law School. I also attend classes at Dartmouth's Medical School in Public Health towards my law degree. I experienced pregnancy discrimination while I worked as a child support officer in Conway, New Hampshire. For the state of New Hampshire, I had two medical conditions: gestational diabetes, which is diabetes while you're pregnant, caused by pregnancy hormones, I had a severe case and I required 4 shots of insulin a day, self-administered, multiple finger pricks to test my blood sugar, exercise after I ate to bring down my blood sugar levels. I was also anemic. I had low iron levels, which made me extremely tired. And I experienced pregnancy discrimination from my supervisor, who was a woman who had had a child. And I reported her. I was harassed on the job. I received nasty comments from my supervisor. That led to further discrimination after I had my baby. So I do see the need for more specific language for what reasonable accommodations are, what undue hardship is, and what reasonable means. So I submitted a report that I co-authored to you all by email. I want to refer you to page 25. This really starts on page 24, but page 25 discusses the term undue hardship. And I have a full page to define what undue hardship is, how it is applied, how employers can use it, what calculations they use, etc. So I would refer you to that page when you're making your decision. It basically looks at the budget of the employer and they compare it to the accommodation that is requested. There are several caveats in there about how you can't use undue hardship for certain situations and scenarios. I would also like to refer you to page 26. Letter F, define reasonable accommodation. I think just saying reasonable is terrible. I think you need to use an actual definition. So I provided you with the one from the American with Disabilities Act. And as Director Malachi explained in 354-A, pregnancy is considered a temporary disability in New Hampshire. In other states, pregnancy is not an automatic disability, but in New Hampshire it is. So this offers the definition of reasonable accommodation from the American with Disabilities Act. It also provides a definition through the U.S. Department of Justice, and it also provides a separate definition under the federal nursing mothers provision that is enforced by the United States Department of Labor. And that's relevant because the federal law of the Pregnancy Discrimination Act is what the state law has to also meet. You can't create a state law that has less provisions, less protective provisions than the federal law. I think probably attorney Sarah Braffman can explain additional legal points. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I would suggest the following. I have talked to the governor's office. I spoke with Elliott Gould. I requested, instead of this bill, I requested that the governor establish a governor's council on pregnancy and lactation discrimination in the workplace explicitly. And that this bill could be amended by that council. And it would have the voices of employers, it would have the voices of the administrative agencies involved, including the Human Rights Commission. It would have the voices of employees who have experienced discrimination in the workplace that have exact examples. And I think that we could really turn out a better product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Abrahamson has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have essentially the same question. I'm an employer, and I'm facing this mandate, and at the same time, I'm trying to hire from a pool of employees for a one-off position, whether it's management position or medical specialist or something else. If I'm facing this law, but some of the candidates are women of childbearing age, are they going to have a harder time?
Totally.
Trying to get that.
And Chairman Hunt actually asked me this question several years ago. I forgot to mention my legislative history is that I'm the woman that has submitted the original language for the previous 7 bills related to pregnancy and lactation. So yes, Chairman Hunt had asked me this question early on, and I had a similar answer. You know what? Employers may take this opportunity, very few, but some may take this opportunity to discriminate. And then people will miss out on jobs, and then maybe they'll have a legal cause of action afterwards that'll get settled 10 years down the line. My answer back then also was what I'm going to say now. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act is already a law that's intended to prevent this type of discrimination. So it makes it discriminatory to not hire somebody based on gender, pregnancy status, etc. And with a good faith effort, I believe that most employers attempt to follow the law and are not intending to intentionally disregard the law for those reasons.
We're getting tight on time, so sure, go ahead.
Real quick, is it possible to put into this bill some kind of dollar amount, with $1,000 or $10,000 per employee or some such thing, where we say, okay, anything beyond this is kind of unreasonable. This would be too much. Kind of put a cap on it so that you don't just have, one company is commission might 1 year they allow somebody just one company to do nothing, and another one you've got to pay the $1 billion to comply with.
Sure. I mean, anything is possible. I think I would defer to Director Malachi on that. She's the one that is in charge of enforcing the statute. What I would suggest is, because every employer has a different budget and salary, that perhaps a ratio could be more efficient and clear. But if there were a governor's council established, I think that would be a high priority to suss out.
We do have one more question here. Representative Bartlett, I'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me get this straight, Ms. Frederick. You've been here 7 times before trying to get a bill passed. You don't like this bill. You want a study commission to make it perfect, and you're willing to continue to allow this to not be on the books, and that's okay with you because you don't like this one.
Those words, I don't think that's an accurate representation of my intent. As Director Malachi said, they've already been doing this since they were established. This bill doesn't create any new provisions or any new accommodations. Employers are already required to provide accommodations under the New Hampshire disability law.
Okay, thank you.
This bill doesn't do anything new. It doesn't offer anything new. It doesn't make anything more clear. I certainly appreciate that it is highly counterintuitive that I would be opposing this bill. I'm extremely passionate about advocating for pregnancy and breastfeeding rights, but if there were amendments to the bill, I would support it. Thank you for your question.
Okay, we thank you very much for your testimony. I will call on Sarah Brafman. Yeah.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative Hunt, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify today. My name is Sarah Bruffman, and I am an attorney and senior policy counsel at A Better Balance. We are a leading advocacy organization and are expert specifically in workplace pregnancy accommodations. We've assisted municipal, state, and the federal government on the issue of pregnancy accommodations. We've helped draft, we've helped implement, we've helped enforce new laws. There are now 30 states that have greater protections for pregnant workers in need of accommodation. And I will say in New Hampshire, we run a free legal helpline as well, where workers from around the country call us with questions. And we do hear from workers in New Hampshire who are pregnant and struggling to get accommodations. Just to the question of whether this is an issue or not, we do hear from New Hampshire workers, and I consulted with my colleagues just before this, and we have in just the past recent past heard from 3 New Hampshire workers around this issue specifically. And I really want to thank Senator Hennessy for lifting up this issue, for her deep commitment to pregnant workers. And the same goes for the commission as well. We've actually spoken with the commission about this bill. And I think the intent is good. You heard Senator Hennessy say to one of the questions, our intent is that reasonable accommodations would be available even if the pregnant worker doesn't have a disability, but a temporary physical disability is only for a leave of absence. But the issue is we really have concerns that the way the bill is drafted won't be interpreted to read that intent into the bill. And that's for a couple of reasons. So number one is that the way the bill is drafted, it could look like reasonable accommodations is only available for those with temporary physical disabilities. And the reason why that's a problem is because for many pregnant workers, and the examples that Senator Hennessy gave, needing a water bottle on a job, needing a bathroom break, pregnant workers often don't need that because they have a disability, but they need that to prevent a disability from arising. So a lot of women will go to the doctor and their doctor will say, please don't lift over 50 pounds because that could cause a complication and that could lead to miscarriage. Please drink a lot of water because if you don't drink water, you will get dehydrated and that could lead to a UTI. So it's not that they currently have a disability, but that they need an accommodation to prevent the disability. And we know that even well-intended agency interpretation can lead to problems. So Maryland is a good example. In Maryland, they passed a law that said reasonable accommodations for pregnant workers with disabilities. The agency had a very broad interpretation of that. Even things that might not rise to the level of disability under federal law could meet the Maryland standard under that statute. But 3 years later, a court came down, and courts don't have to follow agency interpretation. And the court said, well, this pregnant worker doesn't have a disability in the more traditional sense of the word, right? Like having a complication that rises to the level of disability. And so she doesn't get the accommodation. And then there's the sort of third problem, which is that most workers, and most workers we hear from, will never go to an agency. They will never bring a case in court. And all they have to go on is the employer and employee relationship. And employers are going to see in the statute that a pregnant worker has to have a disability in order to receive an accommodation. And I'll say that employers as well have been wanting clarity in the law around when do I have to provide an accommodation and when don't I have to provide an accommodation. And that's why the US Chamber of Commerce is supporting a federal fix around pregnancy accommodations. That's why we've had business support in other states around making sure to say that pregnancy is not a disability very, very clearly in the statute so that we don't have problems. And the same goes if the commission, if there's a change in administration and there's a new agency, they might not take the same interpretation. And you have the commission really, I think, is very dedicated to making sure pregnant women can get the accommodations that they need. But if there's a way to slightly tweak the statute and to tweak the legislation to make it abundantly clear that a pregnant worker doesn't have to have a disability, we think that would really take it to the next step. And there's very simple ways of doing this. So right now, the statute, reasonable accommodation statute, 354A2, in the definitions, there's a definition of reasonable accommodation, there's a definition of undue hardship, and the definition of reasonable accommodation says that it must be an individual with a disability. And so we propose a much shorter, very succinct definition to go into this statute, into this bill itself in 354A7 to say, for the purposes of this subsection, the term reasonable accommodation means any change or modification in the work environment or the normal course of business, and to leave in place the undue hardship standard around that's the same in the statute. And to your point, Representative Abramson, we do have an undue hardship standard already in the New Hampshire Code that has 4 factors that employers have to meet. And I do worry a little bit if we go in and change the undue hardship standard for pregnancy, that we're putting pregnant workers at a disadvantage over workers with disability, because we don't have a cap on the number figure for accommodations for disability, but if we put in a cap for pregnancy, we run into potential problems, that I think could result for employers, honestly, if they're providing accommodations for disabilities on one hand, but the undue hardship standard is different, but here it's not for pregnant workers. And then the other tweak that we would suggest is really just adding a couple commas and a couple words, which is to say an employer shall provide reasonable accommodations, comma, including permitting a female employee to take a leave of absence for the period of temporary physical disability, comma, for the known limitations resulting from pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. And by putting into the statute known limitations, then we are making clear that for accommodations, it does not need to rise to the level of disability, but that for the leave of absence, you would still need a period of temporary physical disability. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm happy to take questions and happy to have a colloquy with Ms. Malachi as well, is that the statute does say and I'm sorry, I'm just going to pull it up because I don't want to quote without being prepared, but it says, for all other employment related purposes, including receipt of benefits under fringe benefit programs, pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions shall be considered temporary disability. So my understanding is that the commission is interpreting pregnancy to mean a temporary physical disability, but the statute goes on to say, affected by pregnancy, childbirth, related medical conditions shall be treated in the same manner as any employee affected by any other temporary disability. And that language really comes from the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, where in order to get accommodations, you need to compare yourself to another employee who's getting accommodations. But what we're trying to do here, what the pregnancy accommodation laws around the country are trying to do that have already been enacted, is to take out that comparator standard and to make very clear, you just have to have known limitations, and you have to engage in this interactive process to get the reasonable accommodation. And then if it's an undue hardship, then they don't need to provide that. And I'm happy to go into how other states have kind of used this language. Some states have used the term known limitations. That's what we're moving towards in the federal legislation. So if state and federal are aligned, known limitations is what we're suggesting here so that they would align if that bill passes. But other states, Massachusetts, Vermont, they use pregnancy related conditions. So they don't use no limitation, but they use pregnancy related condition. So that's an option. Other states use medical need instead of disability. So there's an array of options, and there really are, what we're suggesting is a slight tweak to the bill, which I think would really align with what Senator Hennessy is trying to do. And I think we can align the really amazing intent that's here with the language itself that's in the bill and harmonize them. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy to talk about one of the recent cases in New Hampshire where a court did find that pregnancy was a disability, which kind of took a different approach than the commission does. So it shows how courts really kind of follow their own path. And that's why having clarity in the statute itself is incredibly important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we do have a question, Representative McAleer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brafman, you sound extremely up on this whole thing. I personally would hate to be in a position that I would vote against this bill. Hypothetically, could you write an amendment? Could you personally write an amendment that covers what you're talking about, that I could sponsor and add to the bill, that would would make this bill passable by all. I would hate to be in a position where they don't know that it doesn't go far enough, and therefore I'm voting against it. That's a terrible position to be in. Could you do that?
Yes, and it's ready to go. So I'm happy to email it to Representative Hunt as we speak. I know that we want to streamline it. I think it really puts it in a place where it's aligned with Senator Hennessy and with Ms. Malachi. And I will say, I know we did testify in the Senate, and that I completely understand. I'm not from New Hampshire. I own that, but we have spoken to the ACLU of New Hampshire. We have spoken to Moms Rising in New Hampshire. They have heard these concerns as well. I spoke with the executive director of the ACLU of New Hampshire, Devin Chafee. She couldn't be here today just because of a conflict, but she is in support of the amendment. The ACLU is in support of this amendment and would like to have further conversations. So I'm not here trying to say, let's not pass this bill. We would love to see this bill pass. We just want to see it pass in the right way. And if we could have these discussions to introduce this amendment and put this in and make it the strong bill that it could be, we want to get there with you. But I will say there have been times when, we are here to support pregnant workers. We want clarity. That is the main thrust of our organization. But when the bills don't fulfill their intent, and when the policy itself is something we're concerned about, we think we need to take a pause and give it a little bit more of a look. And when New Hampshire organizations are saying that as well, we think, making sure that we can take the time that, Ms. Chafee said she would really love to have a conversation with Ms. Malachi about this and talk through this amendment. Same goes for Christina D'Alessandro from Moms Rising as well in New Hampshire to talk this through. I think it bears a little bit more time to try to get us all on the same page and making sure that it works best, because we are going to be the ones on the ground hearing from workers in New Hampshire and still struggling with a law that isn't clear, and that isn't clear for employers either. So I'd be happy to share that with you, Representative, so that you can introduce that amendment.
Thank you very much.
Representative Van Houten has a question.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your testimony. I have had a chance to take a look at some of your suggestions prior to your testimony. And my only question right now is, did you present these ideas to the Senate prior to their voting?
We did. We presented them, and Senator Whitley put in an amendment. We did not have a lot of time to talk with the commission about it. And so it was a bit more of a rushed process in doing that. I will say this amendment that you were sent, Representative, was even trying to streamline more so than we did in the Senate to make sure that we're not here trying to do a whole lot. We are here to try to fulfill the intent of Senator Hennessy of the commission and trying to make it even more streamlined than that. But yes, we raised these concerns in the Senate as well.
And Representative Abramson has a question.
Thanks, Representative Van Houten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So I'm not saying redefine undue hardship just for this particular section, this particular provision. What I'm saying is, why not just delete that whole phrase where it starts with on line 9, unless such employer can demonstrate that the accommodation would impose an undue hardship on the operation of the employer's business, and just set a clear, predictable cap, I don't know, $1,000 per employee or $10,000 or some amount where it's predictable, where the employer knows what's the worst case scenario that they might be hit with. So if the accommodations being requested could cost $20,000 or $30,000 in overtime, or it could cost them, hundreds of thousands of dollars in structural changes to their business, can we just put
So, Representative Abramson, you've asked this question multiple times, and I think that the previous testifier did say to you that it needs to be some kind of ratio, because $1,000 to a small, two-person operation is a lot different than $1,000 to a company that has 500 employees. So putting a dollar certain
my suggestion is $1,000 per employee or $10,000 per employee, no more than that amount per employee. So if you have the factory and there are 5 people who become pregnant, you can buy you can buy 5 chairs that you keep around for a very large factory versus a small shop that has 2 employees where it becomes impossible for them to do it, where the cost might be too high for them.
I will say, if I may, Representative Hunt,
yes, please.
That the undue hardship standard exists in every bill, every law that we now have on this, and it has not come up as an issue. So I fully respect the wanting clarity, but on this particular issue, I think we are trying to have an individualized process between employer and employee. And in a sense that putting that cap on can almost impede that individualized process that they can undergo, which I think Ms. Malachi was emphasizing as well. And again, you have the standard in place already for 30 years from the Americans with Disabilities Act around undue hardship. So certainly there are regulations, and maybe it bears giving hypotheticals and examples of what could constitute an undue hardship. And we'd certainly be in favor of that, if it's a small employer, to kind of tease out. But I think that is better served for a regulatory function than it is for bearing it out in the statute itself, because we're talking about an individualized process and because you have a multiple factor test already in the statute.
Okay. Representative Ammon has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Could you tell us where you're located and what your nexus is with the state of New Hampshire? Thank you.
Sure. I am currently located in Washington, D.C. We have offices we're headquartered in New York City. We have offices in Washington, D.C., Nashville, and Denver, Colorado. We are not based in New Hampshire, but like I mentioned, we run a free legal helpline, and we hear from workers around the country who are having issues around getting accommodations in the workplace. And so we have heard from workers in New Hampshire, and I know of 3 specifically who have called us in the recent past around issues of needing pregnancy accommodations in the workplace and not being able to get those accommodations. And so again, I want to emphasize, I know I'm not from New Hampshire, but we are speaking with organizations in New Hampshire. The ACLU of New Hampshire is supportive of this amendment. The Moms Rising, based in New Hampshire, is supportive and understanding of these concerns. And so I totally want to recognize that. But what I can say is we are expert in this issue. I'm not speaking to any of the other issues that are here today, but this is an issue where we are very much in the weeds on it. We very much care about every single pregnant woman, pregnant worker who needs an accommodation is able to get one. We know that there are some workers in New Hampshire that are not able to, and we want to be here to support them no matter where we are in the country.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Malachi, I did promise you that you would have the last word. Oh, wait a minute, Representative McAleer, you have another question for Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. While you were talking, I'm reading through some of my messages, and I've got a message by a Mr. What's his name? Axelman. And he says that if he were to start a business, he would not hire women because of this, if this law went into effect. If I understood you to say earlier, what he's saying is basically illegal. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the Pregnancy Discrimination Act under federal law and New Hampshire law itself, it is illegal to not hire a woman just because she is pregnant. That was made clear in 1978. And I think, there's a lot of, I've heard some discussion about, well, if we pass this law, will that also lead to employers not hiring pregnant women because they're concerned they could need accommodations? So the first thing is that this actually is a workforce retention issue. We are trying to make sure that women can stay healthy and working. Women 88% of women who are working stay through their third trimester. Women want and need to keep working during their pregnancies, but often needing a small accommodation can lead to their being pushed out of the workforce. This is actually a way to keep women in the workforce and attached to the workforce. And that's why the bill has had such bipartisan support in so many places. And the second piece is that, pregnancy accommodations are often very small, and they, we're talking about very minor things, but I think there is a social aspect to it. When the Pregnancy Discrimination Act passed, I think a lot of employers said, well, now that the Pregnancy Discrimination Act exists, it's going to lead to to employers being scared to hire pregnant women because we're nervous about discrimination. And that certainly did not come to bear. Women are in the workforce in record numbers today, and the same continues. And by providing accommodations, I think we're going to see a more harmonious workplace where pregnant women can stay attached to the workforce while they're pregnant and continue to contribute to their workplaces. So I just think it's a question we hear, but it's not a question that comes to bear.
Just a quick comment on that. I would suggest that all of you representatives got this email from Elliot Axelman. I find it a very discouraging comment from him. Please take a read. Thank you.
And I think it shows why this law is needed, because a lot of employers are incredibly wonderful. And I know a lot of members might be employers themselves, and a lot of employers are already doing this. But for some, this clarity in the law about what we as a society believe is important, and from a legal standpoint, is important for those few employers that need that clarity as well.
Okay, so I see that Mr. Axelman has raised his hand. He did not actually sign up to speak. I was going to have Madam Malachi to finish up, and we are extremely late, so we're cutting into our lunch hour. So all I can do is, being respectful, I will let people testify, Mr. Axelman, but you better be brief, because I might just cut you right off. So I will promote you. And Ms. Malachi, I will allow you to wrap it up, but I hope you can also be brief when we do this, because otherwise we can just keep doing this. And so go ahead, Mr. Ag. No, I didn't. It didn't go. Oh, there he goes. Are you up? Yeah, there you go. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry, it looks like it kicked me out a minute ago. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, sorry. All right. Sorry for not signing up. I signed up for Senate Bill 69, but it looks like this one was running late, so I'm here too. But they're similar bills. I can testify once for both. As I said in the email, these bills make women less employable. I know that one of the representatives read my email and said that I sound bigoted. I'm sorry. I don't hate women. I love women. I'm married to one. I have 3 sisters, a mother, and plenty of other female relatives. I want the best for women. My wife is hopefully soon to be pregnant, and she is employed. This bill would make her a less attractive employee. It would make her from an asset into a liability, which makes her less likely to be employed and remain employed. The basic rules of economics cannot be manipulated. If a woman costs more to employ, they are less likely to be employed. As I said in my email, in the testimony, if it costs me twice as much to employ a woman, I'm going to hire a male for that same job. Is that illegal? Yes. Someone mentioned that's probably illegal. Throw me in jail. So be it. You can't manipulate the market and the basic rules of the world. If you make women have accommodations, go with them. Or if you made males have accommodations, if there were a bill that Max proposed that made it a law for you to supply beautiful 25-year-old masseuses every 3 hours for every male employee, that would make male employees more expensive to employ. It would make them liabilities. That would not get jobs, and it would be a bad bill, and I would oppose it. It's not about sexism or feminism. I think it's very inappropriate to make it about feminism or sexism. This is the opposite. This bill makes women harder to employ. And that's my big point. And I'll be brief and I'll end there. Thank you.
Great. Does this mean you won't have to testify on the next bill?
No, they're similar enough that I think this same reasoning applies to both. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, you don't have to testify. Great, thank you. All right, Ms. Malachi, why don't you wrap it up for us, please?
I have a question.
I mean, okay, is it really that vital? This question is really going to be earth-shattering and everybody's going to have a whole new insight here?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Good question.
What's that?
This is a brilliant, brilliant, creative question. How much, if this bill passes as written, and you hire a woman of childbearing age, what is the maximum amount that you may have to spend to make those accommodations based on the wording that's there?
The way I understand this bill is that what they're most concerned is process. It's not about the dollar amounts, it's about the process. Did the company spend the time trying their best to accommodate the pregnant woman? If they did everything possible to accommodate, and they have convinced the commission that they did a good job of process and that they really did everything possible to bend over backwards to try to find a solution, but at the end of the day, they say this is just not going to work, that the commission will not cost them, will not charge them, they will not have to pay a dime, as long as they did their process, as long as they convinced the commission that they did everything in their power to try to find a solution. Okay. All right. So, Ms. Malachi, did I wrap it up for you? Did I say everything you needed to say, or would you like to say anything more, or were you all set?
Just two very quick points to wrap it up, and thank you very much for allowing me to do that. I appreciate the testimony that's been given, all of it, and to several points that were made previously. And I think actually Attorney Brafman may have covered this, but just to put a finer point on it, several of the definitions, I think people were questioning reasonable accommodation, as well as undue hardship. And those elements are defined currently in our statute, which is what we would use. So even though this particular bill is specific to pregnancy in one area of our statute, the definitions are clearly stated, and those are the things that we're using. So we also use precedent to make decisions, and we use, so with how we operate, certainly we are the enforcement agency, but when we have a question on redefining something or a different a possible additional interpretation of something, we go to the AG's office, and that's the arbiter of our state statutes, period, end of story. And so we have a very familial relationship with the AG's office, and we use the attorney that is provided for us all the time, in so much as we have monthly meetings to make sure that we are doing our best to interpret the law in the broadest sense, to allow individuals who may have a charge to be able to bring a charge of discrimination, so that we don't leave anyone out, so that no one's rights are violated or hampered. I think there's a bit of confusion, and I appreciate what Attorney Brafman has stated, and we have met before. The groups that A Better Balance have met with, although they're in New Hampshire, they're national organizations. The New Hampshire grassroots organization that has been dealing with this issue for decades, since 1997, is the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force. They were not included in some of those meetings, and the commission has met with them on other occasions. And to an earlier point, regarding an amendment, I don't think any additional amendments are necessary for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into, but one of which was relative to a council or a group that could, or an advisory council that could contemplate these issues on a consistent basis. That has already been done. It was, there were two different bills, SB 488, which was in 2016, and SB 478, which was in 2018. And both of those bills dealt with creating an advisory council, which Ms. Fredericks was a member of and participated in some degree. with some of the, in terms of the meetings, and there was a wide variety of stakeholders. There were mothers, state agencies, someone, an attorney representing, appointed by the commission. You had people from DHHS, you had people from the business community. So there was a wide variety of stakeholders. And from that council, actually, SB 69, which we'll eventually get to, was created. And so there's wide, there's wide, I can't think of the word now, but a lot of people pull together to come up with the bill that the SB 69 that we're going to discuss. I apologize, a little flustered at the moment. Part of the confusion is that in New York and quite a few other states, you may, as a person who's been discriminated against, you may go to court first, and or you might go to a commission like ours. In New Hampshire, you come to us first. You do not go to court first. So we are able to interpret and give deference to people who are filing a charge of discrimination for themselves, even if they're represented. But we really work to make sure that someone who's not represented has a full understanding of what remedies are available to them. So using a court interpretation, although could be relevant at some point, if a person is been, if the person who files the charge gets, if there's probable cause that's found, then that individual can then remove it from us and take it to court, or they can remain with us and go through a hearing after probable cause is found, just like if the business wants to remove it to court and try it there. But it's important to note that although court decisions are relevant, they do not have bearing as to how the commission would follow a charge through. So you have to, based on state statute, file a charge of discrimination with us first. And it's good to know from Attorney Brafman that there have been some calls that were made to them. I would appreciate if those individuals, and I would love to work even more closely with A Better Balance, if those individuals had been referred to the commission, we might have either been able to file a charge on their behalf or to intervene to assist those individuals because of how state law is stated. A Better Balance, they can maybe talk to the employer, but they cannot file a charge on that individual's behalf. They have to come to us first. So it would be, I think, even more productive if we were more collaborative on that, and we could assist those New Hampshire individuals in their concerns or issues that they might be having. So without us knowing about them, there's nothing that we can do. And so I would leave it there and hope that we can conclude testimony on SB 69 and then move on, on SB 68, okay, and then move on to SB 69.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Rev. Brafman, but yeah, we can't have this going back and forth. Okay, so and I did promise her that I'd give her the last word. So I screwed up, but at this point, let's just get on to the next bill. I think we all pretty much have got through this one. So I thank you all, and I will close the public hearing and say that there were 91 people in support, 5 opposed, and 1 neutral. Okay, and better late than never. Senator Whitney, I'm sorry about this delay. Things got a little more complicated than I expected. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Becky Whitley, and I'm honored to serve New Hampshire Senate District 15, which includes the wonderful communities of Concord, Pennacook, Henniker, Hopkinton, and Warner. As a working mother of a young child and a former nursing mother, I'm proud to appear before you today to introduce Senate Bill 69. Many working families know that working and having a family has never been so difficult. Stagnant incomes and outdated workplace practices continue to pit being a parent against having a career. Furthermore, the global pandemic has disproportionately impacted working mothers and women of color in New Hampshire, across the country as well. And we've seen women leaving the workforce during the last year because they simply cannot meet all the demands placed on them. We need to do more to support working mothers. Senate Bill 69 does this by requiring certain employers in a flexible manner to provide access to a sufficient space and a reasonable break period for nursing mothers to express milk during working hours. This bill builds on years of work by Senator Martha Fuller Clark and an incredibly strong and responsive coalition that was mentioned before of stakeholders who work together to come up with a New Hampshire solution to support women in the workplace. That's the bill that you will hear today. So specifically, this bill fills the coverage gap for working women who were and continue to be excluded from the 2010 federal law, Break Time for Nursing Mothers. This federal law was an incredibly important first step, but nearly 1 in 4 women of childbearing age are not covered by the federal law. 32 states have already passed legislation to bridge the gap in the federal law to cover more nursing mothers and provide expanded protections. And now it's New Hampshire's turn. This bill is a win-win solution for the Granite State because it benefits babies, working mothers, businesses, and our economy. While the health benefits of nursing are well known, and there are others to testify to those health benefits, returning to work, and we know that returning to work and a lack of employer accommodations are frequent reasons for women to stop breastfeeding before a child turns 1. Workplace lactation programs like the ones contained in this bill have been shown to increase breastfeeding among working mothers who are planning to breastfeed, which again benefits both the mother and the baby. Breastfeeding protects babies and children from a host of acute and chronic diseases that has been shown to lower healthcare costs for mothers and their infants when compared to non-breastfeeding mothers. But not only that, it also provides a real opportunity for employers to build loyalty, trust, and productivity with their employees by enabling them to provide something so important to their child. This bill is an important initiative to keep working mothers in the workforce as we rebuild our economy. This is increasingly important as New Hampshire continues to experience a workforce shortage. And women are a large and important sector of New Hampshire's labor force. Women make up almost 64% of our civilian workforce and comprise 2/3 of the essential workforce during the pandemic. Supporting nursing mothers in the workplace can also benefit companies and is part of building a modern, forward-thinking economy. You will hear from many businesses today on that point. So I wanted to point out why this is a very reasonable bill with a uniquely New Hampshire solution, and just highlight some points from the broad coalition that worked on this bill. So this bill isn't about mandating certain things, it's about creating access, not mandating space. The coalition that worked on this bill was responsive to the needs of New Hampshire small businesses and listened to them when they expressed concerns about text in the bill, which is why you'll see the added definition of undue hardship. We defined undue hardship, and that was at their request. And you'll see that connection of the definition of undue hardship with the ability for businesses to request a hardship exemption. We also thought it was very important to respond to businesses by defining what a reasonable break period is. So you'll see that we have defined what a reasonable break period is. That was in response to businesses that wanted some more clarity. And you will also note that the definition, and you'll hear some more testimony from doctors, is consistent with the biological needs of a nursing woman. So if you haven't nursed before, you may not know that nursing is lactation, and nursing is a biological function. It's a give and take with mothers and babies. And so this time period in the definition is consistent with the biological needs of mom and baby. And again, you'll hear more about that. Lastly, I wanted to point out that other states with a similar law filling this coverage gap require all employers to comply. But this bill applies only to employers with 6 or more employees. And that was to be consistent and thus more predictable for businesses with New Hampshire's existing anti-discrimination statute, RSA 354A. So I will stop there. There will be plenty of people behind me, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
We have a question, Representative Burrows.
Yes, thanks for taking my question, which is on the clause about the hardship exemption, who gets to determine what is actually a hardship exemption, because it's not spelled out?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Representative Burrows. And this came up also in the Senate. You'll hear testimony from the Department of Labor, but you'll see that this bill puts the language within the Department of Labor statute. So it's clear just based where this language will go, that it's the Department of Labor that will be interpreting it and granting those hardship exemptions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Then we have another senator here. And I've just promoted up. There you are. Good. Well, still good morning.
We've barely made it.
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the House Commerce Committee. It's very nice to see you again. I'm here to testify in support of SB 69, and I will attempt to be brief as I know you've had a long morning. I'm thrilled to be here in support of this bill. I think, this bill builds on the long legacy of Senator Martha Fuller Clark, who I am trying to step into the very large shoes of, but has been the result of over 4 years of study by the Lactation Advisory Council. So, this issue has been extensively studied, and I think this legislation has emerged as a very matured and sophisticated compromise. It's a flexible bill, and it allows accommodation by our businesses for this very natural process. I think we all feel that small businesses in New Hampshire are our lifeblood. They're our priority, and it's certainly not the intent of this bill to jeopardize that in any way. My personal experience is that I worked at a company of 6, or I do work at a company of 6 people, and they were able to accommodate similarly to what this bill would ask for me to nurse my daughter when I had her about 1.5 years ago. So I think, Senator Whitley touched on part of this. Efforts like this support a more modern economy for New Hampshire. And if you talk to our businesses, their biggest need is employees. They have open positions, and especially now post-pandemic, with the housing market being what it is, we need to do everything we can as a state to support continuing to modernize our economy and to attract talent into the state. And so this is just one more tool that I think supports working families being able to have moms return to work and afford their housing. It's such a small period in a woman's professional life over the overall contributions that she'll make to her employer. And so I think that it makes sense for us all to support this, and I hope you can support a recommendation of it to pass. Over on the Senate side, we were able to see this bill pass unanimously out of Senate Commerce, and it also received a unanimous floor vote. So we're hoping that House Commerce will give it the same treatment. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify and happy to answer any questions that I can.
Representative Abramson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. How would you accommodate this mandate for workers working in road construction?
Workers working in what?
Road construction.
Road construction. Yeah, so this bill does ask, for an employer to kind of, previously to a lot of the, similar to a lot of the testimony you heard on the previous bill, what we're trying to do here is have employers make reasonable accommodations. So if, for example, a worker could, return to a space that is private somewhere, it could be on or off site, have access to the equipment they need, which is just a chair and an outlet in order to express milk, and then return to the job, then that would be all we were asking. And that can be accommodated in different ways between the employer and the employee.
Follow-up?
Yes.
What a surprise. Further question, you may inquire.
What about transportation? I'm thinking, whether it's trucking or boats or planes or what have you. What about someone working in the field of transportation?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. And I would have a similar answer, which is that, it's just something that the employer and the employee need to work out. But I will point out that, we make accommodations for folks on the job for all different things, and that's required by statute now. The value of your employee over the long term is something that needs to be considered by the employer when you're making these decisions. And I think acknowledging that women give birth and that women need to nurse their children, and that bonding experience is good for babies and for mothers is one side of the coin. And then I think the other side is that it really gives employers an opportunity to build their relationship with their employees. I know in my case, it only increased my loyalty and productivity with my employer because I felt that they had really accommodated that sort of unique period in my life. So I think, again, it's something, that isn't built into our economy as it is, but I think is something that we should all start to put the tools in place to accommodate, as it is something that affects all of our pregnant people across the state.
If I may, I wanted to respond to that question too, that may give some more clarity.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out, we are not asking folks and businesses to create, to build new spaces. This is about allowing for and creating access rather than mandating space. The other point, I think, with the industries that you mentioned, you rightly mentioned, trucking, construction, those are our larger businesses that are already under the current requirement under federal law. Companies of 50 employees or more are already required to do this by federal law. So this is just thinking through what works best for our small businesses. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have Representative Abel is a co-sponsor of the bill.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I am Representative Richard Abel, Grafton, District 13, serving Lebanon, and I am a sponsor of Senate Bill 69. As we've heard earlier this morning, this bill has come before before House Commerce Committee in the past. This is how I learned about it and came to support it. It has passed this committee in prior sessions and has been and has also passed in other versions of the bill through the House at large. I sponsored Senate Bill 69 because of three things. I strongly believe it's pro-business. I believe it is pro-employee, and I believe it's pro-family. And I'm just not going to talk about the bill. I'm going to talk about why I support it. Although I'd be happy to answer questions, and I will send the clerk a copy of my written testimony. This bill is pro-business because it helps businesses recruit and retain quality employees in an important demographic. It builds loyalty in employees who appreciate their employer's reasonable accommodations. And as was mentioned just prior, I think it can also increase an employee's productivity and attachment to the success of the business. That's important. It also reduces the time and the cost of employee turnover. And I've run 2 businesses, and I can tell you that that's one of the things that is always a problem for a business, because it helps retain employees, and it doesn't put you in a situation where you need to find and train replacements. I find this to be a win-win-win. As working mothers are able to stay with their employer. And I urge my Commerce colleagues in your wisdom to give a favorable response of ought to pass to Senate Bill 69. So employers, employees, families, and our economy can all benefit. And thank you. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Don't see any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, now switch gears a little bit, and we have the Department of Health and Human Services, Lisa Silos.
Good morning, Chairman Hunt and members of the committee. You can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Lisa Sorois. I'm a registered dietitian and a lactation consultant, and I've been working with breastfeeding families for the past 20 years. I'm here to speak today on behalf of the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services as a longtime public health professional in the Division of Public Health. The Department of Health and Human Services supports breastfeeding mothers and infants through its many public health programs. Those programs include the WIC Nutrition Program, Breastfeeding Peer Counselor, chronic disease programs, maternal and child health programs, such as our home visiting program, prenatal, primary care, and child health programs. All of the aforementioned programs contribute to the support, protection, and promotion of breastfeeding for New Hampshire families. I'd like to share most recently, the Division of Public Health awarded a 3-year grant to 2 Keene State College professors to implement a workplace lactation support initiative. The project funded the creation of 43 new lactation spaces across all of New Hampshire through competitive mini grants to small and medium-sized New Hampshire businesses. The mini grants included funds to establish a private space, on-site technical assistance with writing a policy, and training for their human resource staff. Through this project, more than 3,500 working women of childbearing age now have access to a clean and private space to express milk at work and a policy that allows for reasonable break time through this project. Employers were also offered access to a free online training module and an employer toolkit to help with establishing and sustaining a comprehensive program. Both of these resources are available for free for all New Hampshire employers and are on the department's website now. The health effects of breastfeeding are well recognized in the United States. As previously mentioned, one of the most highly effective preventative measures a mother can take to protect the health of her infant and herself is to breastfeed. Greater than 88% of New Hampshire women initiate breastfeeding after delivery in the hospital, but less than 40% continue to breastfeed through the first year, as recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Among women of low income in New Hampshire, only 72% ever breastfeed, and less than 20% continue through the first year. Returning to work is one of the reasons cited by working moms for stopping breastfeeding before reaching their goals. I thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that the department has been doing over the past couple of years. I submitted my testimony in writing, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you very much. Okay, so next, somebody raised their hand. Rudolph, I don't see you on my list here, so I'll have to wait a little bit for you here. So next up is Donna Hosmer. And Donna, you just have to unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning. Afternoon.
Oh, that's right. I started in the morning, as did you. This has been a long day for you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak before you, Chairman Hunt and the other members of your committee. My name again, Donna Gaudet Hosmer. I'm the mother of 4 teenagers, all of whom were breastfed. I'm also a business owner in that until very recently, my family and I had owned AutoServe dealerships in Tilton, New Hampshire. We'd owned that business for over 30 years. And I'm also a partner in a growing manufacturing plant in Lancaster. So between these 2 businesses, we employed well over 300 people. I'm speaking in strong support of Senate Bill 69, a bill designed to provide mothers returning to work with sufficient space and a reasonable break to express milk. As has been said, current breastfeeding legislation put forth by the Affordable Care Act only covers hourly employees, leaving a gap of 1 in 4 women. New Hampshire is the only state in New England without its own workplace breastfeeding legislation. So SB 69 would require employers to accommodate reasonable time and space for nursing moms to express work during the workday, or to express milk during the workday. This is important because this legislation, as has been said, supports mothers, but also families as their dynamics change and women transition back to work. As a business owner and an industry leader, I am sensitive to mandates that are often well-intentioned, but ultimately unnecessarily inhibit small business. And I believe that the legislature should exercise great discretion when considering mandates, and only do so when there's a compelling overriding consideration. SB 69 is an opportunity to pass legislation that supports women returning to work, supports the healthiest option for children, and puts New Hampshire on par with other New England states who've already recognized the importance of this issue. I jumped at the chance to champion this initiative when my friend Joyce Kelly, who's chairing the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force, invited me to speak to your committee today. In fact, our dealership participated in that mini grant program that Lisa Sorois had just spoken about a couple of years ago, and I attached to my testimony, which I submitted, a flyer of the lactation space that we created in our business. We were very proud of the space that we created. We posted those flyers throughout our business, and we encouraged the widespread use of the lactation lounge, as we called it, among not only our employees, but our customers. And as someone mentioned earlier, the response was not only positive, we did see the returning loyalty and increased productivity, because our people knew we were genuinely invested in them. And I see as a business owner how that helps with turnover, which can be very costly. This initiative resonates with me also as a working mom who nursed, and because it's not only consistent with our corporate culture to be family friendly, we were always looking for ways to empower women. But something Joyce Kelly had said to me early on really stuck. She said, when women encounter barriers to nursing at work, it's more likely they'll give up. And instinctively, I knew that this was true because I too struggled a lot with nursing. But fortunately for me, I didn't have to face obstacles at work or from a supervisor who didn't understand. I'm grateful for the people who encouraged me and helped me achieve some modicum of success in my nursing. And I want all mothers to feel like they can do this and not give up on nursing or working. Giving up because of work pressures can be very painful for mothers who only wish to give their children the best possible start. It can even discourage women from returning to work, and that's not good for our economy. And I wouldn't have been able to nurse my children if obstacles were in my way instead of encouragement and support. So eliminating workplace barriers will contribute to a mother's success here and have a great positive impact on New Hampshire families and businesses. In closing, SB 69 provides the necessary support for nursing mothers in the workplace and fosters the growth of healthy families throughout New Hampshire and business growth as more mothers return to work knowing that they can nurse and work. For these reasons, I'm asking for your support of SB 69, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Abramson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking the question. This is more philosophical. If employers benefit from reduced retention and keeping better workers and attracting better workers, why have the state mandate it? If employers are already doing this as much as they practically can, why have the state step in and force them to do it even more?
I don't know that they all see the forest through the trees. I think that my personal experience has been that by making this investment, which sometimes seems hard at first when you're looking at change, I've reaped the benefits of those decisions. And so I'm speaking from my perspective. I know that it increased our retention, it decreased turnover. We had happier, when we sold our business a couple of months ago, about a third of our employees worked for us for over 20 years. We were just a family that cared, and people stayed with us. So I think it's a great investment. And I know, as it coming from an industry that was primarily male dominated, we had a huge and growing infusion of women over the last 10 years in our industry. So that was my experience. I think if you invest in them, they will come and they will stay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, since you mentioned her, I guess I'll call up Joyce Kelly. And Joyce, if you want to raise your hand, because I don't see you right off. Oh, you must be the breast task force. Ah, see, that's why I didn't see you. Okay. Went in by title rather than name.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll start my video. Thanks, Donna, for that. Good morning, Chairman Hunt and committee members. My name is Joyce Kelly. I am a resident of Laconia, New Hampshire, a registered nurse, and the chair of the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force. The New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force is an educational nonprofit and is the recognized state breastfeeding coalition of the United States Breastfeeding Committee. Our mission is to promote, protect, and support breastfeeding through education, outreach, and advocacy. Breastfeeding is regarded by all major health organizations as the optimal infant feeding method that supports improved health outcomes. We have approximately 50 members throughout the state, many of whom work in hospital settings, but also community settings, public health settings, and educators. Senate Bill 69 closes the gap that was unintentionally left by the Federal Break Time for Nursing Mother law passed in 2010 that required employers to provide access to time and space for breast milk expression during the workday to hourly workers covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. So often we see questions raised about this in the testimony, which we have today. Many of the worker conditions raised are already covered by the federal law. But this Senate Bill 69 would require employers to provide access to time and space to express milk during the workday for all workers, regardless of labor category, with the exceptions noted in the bill that Senator Whitley had also mentioned. And this would include teachers who were excluded from federal protections. So currently, teachers do not have access to time and space to express milk during the workday. Senate Bill 69 is the result of several years' collaboration and work of the Governor's Advisory Council on Lactation, of which we were a part of. We have collaborated with groups including the Department of Labor, as well as the New Hampshire Business and Industry Association, in order to craft a bill that we feel addresses the relevant needs related to workplace breastfeeding support that is comprehensive and of value to both employers and employees. As stated, New Hampshire is the only state in New England that does not have a state level law to protect working mothers. New Hampshire Senate Bill 69 is a very reasonable bill that proposes accommodations for 1 year after the birth of a child for an employee to have access to time and space to pump during the workday. Other states, such as Maine and Vermont, have laws that are much more extensive, including up to 3 years of protection. We feel that the bill as drafted is a New Hampshire solution for working mothers and employees. We did choose to define reasonable break time of approximately 30 minutes every 3 hours in a workday because, one, it is physiologically what most women need to maintain their milk supply when expressing milk when away from their baby. And two, because we have received many inquiries over the years from New Hampshire businesses and HR professionals asking what is reasonable for a new mom to express milk during a workday because they just don't know. Please note that the bill does include language that allows an employer and an employee to agree to different terms. And while we have chosen to define reasonable break time, there is variability from mother to mother and case to case, often based on the age of the infant, with the need for milk expression often becoming less over time as the baby gets older. And mind you, it is just for the 1 year. It is important to note that this bill does not necessarily require an employer to undertake the construction or building of a room solely for the purposes of milk expression. This bill provides for access to time and space to pump. It may be temporary or maybe a permanent space. But even when an employer chooses to make a permanent space, it can often be completed at a nominal cost. I was one of the consultants on the mini grants, and we saw quite the variety of spaces. We have resources available to help people do that. This bill makes sense. It would benefit employers with improved worker retention and satisfaction. And it has been recently established that there's approximately a 3-to-1 return on investment for employers who have established a workplace breastfeeding program for their employees. This bill has bipartisan support, and I encourage you to vote ought to pass on this bill as it is. Thanks very much for allowing me to testify today.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question, Representative Ammon. I assume he's going to ask you for a copy of your testimony.
I did send it to the committee.
Okay. Keith, you have a question? Representative Ammon, can you hear me? I don't know. He must be looking for it.
Hey, I'm right here now.
Okay.
Third time's the try. If you haven't already, could you submit written testimony to the committee?
Yeah, I did submit it to the committee email, the general email, along with letters of support that were sent into the task force.
Okay, thank you. I'll look for it.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. We thank you very much for your testimony. I don't see any other questions from the committee members. Okay, so then still going along, Hillary Schuler. Oh, I see you, Hillary, so don't raise your hand. Okay. I'm just promoting you, Hillary. And all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Hillary Schuler. I'm from Enfield, New Hampshire, and I'm a nursing working mom to 2 young boys. One of them I have with me. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. When I returned to work after having my first son in 2019, I was not ready. I was not prepared for the stress that came with figuring out my new normal, how to get out of the house with a baby in tow, how it would feel dropping him off at daycare while I headed to work for 8 hours, and how hard I would have to advocate for myself and for my son. Because I had a shared office, I needed a separate space to express milk while at work. I had had a conversation with my manager prior to my return, and I was told they had a space for me to use. That space was a storage closet. It was hot, the door didn't lock, and it wasn't private. I knew this space wasn't adequate. It wasn't sanitary, but I was told it was all there was. After a couple of weeks sweating in this storage closet as I expressed the food to feed my child, I knew I needed to advocate for myself because if I didn't, this is what I would be stuck with. I reached out to Human Resources at my employer and I explained the situation. It took a few weeks, but a new space was found, an empty office 2 floors up. I felt like I had won the lottery. My job required me to attend events and conferences outside of my office. Anytime I would attend an event or a conference, I would reach out to the organizers and let them know that I'm a mom and I asked about a lactation space. When I asked about a lactation space, I was often met with looks of annoyance and disgust and was told there was no space for me. I have expressed milk in numerous public bathrooms, hoping that the power cord to my pump would reach the only outlet available. I have expressed milk in my car in the middle of winter to avoid having to pump in a bathroom again. And I have expressed milk in a storage closet behind a bar at a conference venue. Yes, I have learned how to advocate for myself and my child during our breastfeeding journey, but lactation spaces should be the norm, not the exception. There is enough stress put on the shoulders of mothers and working mothers. Where and when she can express milk to feed her child should not be the cause of any stress. I fully support this bill as a working mother and a native to the state of New Hampshire. Thank you again for the opportunity and time to testify this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, I guess people are getting hungry. All right, we'll let the fireworks begin. So Kate Frederick. And welcome back, Kate.
Thank you. I hope there won't be any fireworks. I would like it if we could all work together. And that's what my intention is. I do support breastfeeding rights. Let me most of you heard me in the last hearing. I just want to fill in some gaps. I founded the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Rights Coalition. We're the largest coalition in New Hampshire, and we're the most inclusive coalition. As I mentioned before, I'm a law school student and a student of public health, and I had been fired for requesting accommodations to breastfeed during work hours when I was employed by the state of New Hampshire as a child support officer. I've had legal proceedings in this conflict going on for 9 years without any resolution. My case is still active. There was recently a tie in the New Hampshire Supreme Court over whether or not I have the right to sue, not whether there was any discrimination or not. And because there was a tie, by default, I lost. There's been new motions filed. So my case is not over yet. What I'd like to talk to you about today is obviously this bill. I don't think it's constitutional, which is why I'm opposing it. And I want to point out some of the flaws and problems with this bill, but I want to do it very briefly. So similar to the last hearing, I submitted my report, my testimony. On page 3, I just want to refer you to RSA 275-37A, smokers' rights. There's actually statutory protection against discriminating against employees who smoke, but there is not any statutory protection against employees who are lactating. This bill is a pumping only bill, and it specifically states that expressing milk excludes breastfeeding. So let me explain to you the result of that. What you're gonna have is, what happened to me is I requested privacy to breastfeed during work hours because my son was not able to drink from a bottle yet as an infant. And I was told I had to breastfeed in a public space, either in front of my clients, my coworkers, or outside in the parking lot, or sitting on the stairwell in an office building with multiple offices. So if I had been willing to expose my breasts and my baby and be naked from the top up, potentially, I suppose I would have kept my job. But I wasn't willing to do that to keep my job. I wanted privacy to breastfeed. Recently, the New Hampshire legislature, and I commend them, passed a bill making it illegal to discriminate against someone for their gender, including transgender. Well, guess what, folks? Transgender people can breastfeed They can also chest feed. And what you're going to create here is forcing employees to feed their babies directly in public. And many of them may not want to. Many of them may want privacy like I did. There's also the issue of safety. So this bill leaves out break time for breastfeeding or chest feeding and space, private, safe space for breastfeeding or chest feeding. I'd like to also explain, this may seem very basic to some of you, but what is a nursing mother? Is it a breastfeeding mother? Is it a pumping mother? Is it chest feeding person? Is it an employee who's lactating and their baby died at childbirth, but they're pumping so that they can donate milk to a milk bank? Typically, a nursing mother can be all of these. You may pump, you may breastfeed, etc., at different times, depending on different situations. I support a bill that provides an incremental bit of success. I don't think this bill does. I think this bill is going backwards, which is why I'm opposing it. You know, praise for Governor Sununu. I have to say, I'm a fan. He implemented the executive order allowing state employees, like I was, to bring their babies to work to breastfeed them during work hours because he values the importance of breastfeeding. This bill is going backwards because instead of codifying the executive order into statute, it's excluding breastfeeding. So in order to be brief, I will leave my comment with one more point. There's currently a federal law, a federal bill that is looking to accomplish something very similar. The legislature could wait and see what happens with the federal bill. It's called Providing Urgent Maternal Protections in the Nursing Mothers Act. Lastly, I think that the state of New Hampshire spends a lot of money on supporting breastfeeding. I don't see how you can support breastfeeding by excluding breastfeeding or firing someone for breastfeeding or needing to breastfeed. And I don't feel that an employee should have to negotiate to keep her career and her baby alive. It just doesn't seem like the New Hampshire way to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Abramson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. This bill as written, is your concern in your testimony that the unknown cost of this, or the problems with this bill, can make it more difficult for employers to hire nursing mothers and for nursing mothers to find work?
I apologize. Let me tell you if what I heard is what you said. You're asking me if our concerns are about financial needs or about access to work?
For the employers facing the cost of this unfunded mandate, is it going to make it more difficult for employers to employ nursing mothers, and could it make it more difficult for nursing mothers to find work in the workplace?
I see. You know, similar to your question in the last hearing, unfortunately, the answer is possibly, probably, with some exception. A few employers may take advantage and illegally discriminate, but I believe that most employers want to do the right thing. The problem is employers need certainty, right? They need to know what's going to happen when, how long is it going to take, how much money is it going to take, and how will that affect everything else. And so when you have pregnancy or you're lactating, you don't always have those answers on hand, and it also fluctuates. it's sort of like a moving target. So that's the conflict, is the employees can't always give the employer the certainty that they need to feel confident and comfortable and plan ahead. So what the federal bills have done and what Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts have done, all the states that are adjacent to New Hampshire, they've found a way to allow breastfeeding during work hours. And they have a provision that says the employee is allowed to breastfeed anywhere they are authorized to be or anywhere they and their child are authorized to be. So breastfeeding accommodations don't cost anything if you're willing to breastfeed in public. If you need to create a space, I think probably Senator Whitley, or maybe it was Joyce Kelly, said that this is just a temporary structure. Nobody's being told to create a brand new office. You could even use a pop-up tent. So I can share with you a website that breaks down how to create a space in any industry. I'll email you the website, but it's on womenshealth.gov/supporting nursing moms, etc. I'll send it to you right now so you can see it, and it breaks it down by restaurants, hotels, retail, road construction, etc. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we have another question, Representative Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I'd like to see where in this bill you're saying that breastfeeding is excluded, because what I see it is has to do with the employer needing to make a accommodation for pumping. It does. I don't see where it excludes breastfeeding.
It's in the definition of expressing milk. So this bill defines expressing milk as excluding breastfeeding.
I don't see where it says excluding breastfeeding.
It says shall not include breastfeeding. I believe I can find it exactly for you if you want.
Okay, would you find that, please?
Yes, it's
Roman numeral 3. Roman numeral 3. Expression of milk means the initiation of lactation by manual or mechanical means, but shall not include breastfeeding.
But that's just a definition of expression of milk. That doesn't say you can't breastfeed.
It says it shall not include breastfeeding. So employers do not have to provide accommodations for breastfeeding. This bill says you have to provide accommodations for expression of milk shall not include breastfeeding. So what, Representative Bartlett, what I was told by the state of New Hampshire was the lactation room was only for pumping, no breastfeeding allowed in the lactation room. The federal law is the Nursing Mothers Provision. It amended the Fair Labor Standards Act in the Affordable Care Act, and it used the terms express milk. So it doesn't include breastfeeding.
I'm sorry, I have to disagree. I don't see that in the bill.
Would you believe? Okay. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we thank you again. It's always a pleasure seeing you again. All right. So having no other person, now I'll have Ms. Malachi, you now have the last word. Assuming you're still there.
I am here. Thank you. Thank you very much. So there's been a plethora of testimony on the previous bill, and some of those items certainly are still standing as we're in pretty much the same topic. I wanted to again say thank you to Representative Hunt and to the rest of the committee for allowing me to give a few moments of testimony here. And I would certainly like to expressly thank Senator Whitley, Senator Perkins-Coie, Lisa Soroyas, and Joyce Kelly from the New Hampshire Breastfeeding Task Force for all of the work and their testimony that's been given. Although SB 69 does not directly affect the commission, the Human Rights Commission had 2 members on the Lactation Council, which worked collaboratively to put this bill together. And I believe Senator Whitley stated that this bill was something that was moving through the process, the legislative process last cycle. But as so many things got laid on the table due to COVID, this was one of them. And the commission would certainly like to express their support for SB 69, for it to pass as written, where there are no additional amendments or changes that need to be made. And mothers and families have had to wait, or especially mothers in the workplace, and businesses have had to wait quite a while for this. So it would be wonderful if the committee would vote this as ought to pass and move it along. I know that there was at least a question relative to accommodation, and I also appreciate Representative Bartlett's understanding. When I reread that section, it looks as though you were correct in that was part of the definition and not expressly removing breastfeeding. And again, when you talk about reasonable accommodations, and I don't remember the woman's name that testified earlier that has a car that had the family car dealership. If in that conversation, and I happen to have my child nearby, I mean, and that would have to be something that you would have to discuss, because the average woman that's working may not be one that is currently breastfeeding during her work shift, right? So when I go home, I may do that with my child, and I primarily would need a place for expression of milk. Now, if my employer says, hey, I don't mind someone dropping off your child and you can nurse your child during the same amount of time where I would normally do my milk expression, great. That's between the woman and her employer. And that could be considered, as we've talked before, a reasonable accommodation. What might not be reasonable is if the employee is requesting during their 8-hour shift to leave the office or the place of work multiple times to go to a place where the child is located to then nurse the child and come back. That may not be reasonable, and that would again be a conversation that the employee and the employer would have. If the employer allows that person to make up work because that's okay, and they would have maybe 2 hours out of their 8-hour day in order to do that, that's great. But this bill doesn't change the flexibility that an employee and an employer would have to work together. It simply allows there to be a clean, safe, and private place for this lactation process to take place. So I thank you all for allowing me to come again before you and testify. I'm certainly available for any questions, but I'm sure you're ready to have lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. I screwed up again. I'm sorry, Courtney. You wanted to testify. All right, sorry. He's can't read the small print or something today. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Malachi. So Courtney Tanner also did sign up. So
absolutely, and I will be brief as brief. Thank you, Chairman Hunt and members of the committee. I'm going to testify today in 2 capacities. First, as the Director of Government Relations at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. Dartmouth-Hitchcock supports Senate Bill 69 as drafted. In your email, you'll find written testimony from Dr. Maria Padin, who's our Chief Medical Officer at our community group practices, located in Concord, Manchester, and Nashua. Dr. Padin is a trained and practicing OBGYN physician and highlighted the benefits of breastfeeding and expressed milk to mothers and babies. Just to highlight very briefly, for infants, the protection of infectious diseases and SIDS. For mothers, the lower risk of breast, ovarian cancer, diabetes, hypertension, just to name a few. Dr. Pradine noted that Senate Bill 69 provides a minimal standard for employers to support their nursing employees. But second, I'd like to testify as a working mother to a daughter who I nursed. I live in Bedford, New Hampshire with my husband, my 19-month-old daughter, and our nutty border collie. I'm a full-time employee at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. I'm actually, as I stated, a lobbyist, and eager to get back into the committee room with you all. Joanna, my daughter, struggled to latch when she was born. After a stressful first week of life filled with doctor's appointments and unwelcomed weight loss, we took Joanna to a pediatric dentist and revised her tongue ties. And for the next 6 weeks, Joanna and I, with the fierce support of my husband, worked hard to get Joanna to improve her ability to latch. We took her to many OT appointments and to the pediatricians a number of times. We worked with a lactation consultant. And by the time Joanna was 8 weeks old, she had it down. And then 4 weeks later, I had to return to work. The transition was hard, but it was possible because my employer made it very clear that my family came first and my work came second. Similar to all of your days at the State House, here you are going well into your lunch period. My days were unpredictable, but my employer made it very clear that I should need to find some time to express milk down in that Mama Roo in the basement. I will just close up by saying, in return, what I am able to give to my employer is I've never had to call out of sick from work. My little one has never been sick. She's 19 months old, and I'm knocking on wood as I say that. She's never had a sore throat, an ear infection, or a sniffle. As a working mom, I'm asking you to pass Senate Bill 69 as drafted. It sends a signal to young families like mine that New Hampshire cares about them. I'm happy to take questions, Representative Hunt, but I'm also happy to have you all go to lunch.
Thank you. I don't see any hands, and anybody have any questions? I think we're all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no more hands up either on the attendee side, so I guess I really did get everybody this time. Huey. Okay, so the Senate Bill 69 had 130 supporters. 8 people were opposed and 2 were neutral. And with that, I will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 69. And that is our day for today. So for the committee members, I'm not going to do anything for next Tuesday because I assume there might be some caucuses or some other things that will get us ready